the Amazon warriors, Scythian nomads, and the roots of female phytosimogenia self-stepping onto the vast, windswept steppes of ancient Eurasia, where the horizon stretches endlessly under a pale sky, and the air carries the faint scent of wild grasses and horse sweat. This is the world of the Scythians, a nomadic people whose daily existence revolved around the rhythms of migration, herding, and survival in a harsh landscape. You are there, among them, as the sun rises slowly over the flat plains, casting long shadows from clusters of felt tents in grazing herds. The Scythians, known to the Greeks through tales passed by traders and explorers, lived in what we now call the Pontic Caspian steppe, spanning from the Black Sea to the edges of modern-day Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Their society, documented in fragments by historians like Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, was one of practical egalitarianism born from necessity rather than ideology. In this environment, where every member of the tribe contributed to the group's endurance, women were not mere bystanders. Archaeological digs, such as those at Kurgan's ancient burial mounds, reveal skeletons of females buried with weapons, iron daggers, bronze arrowheads, and bows crafted from laminated wood and sinew. You can picture a young Scythian woman, her calloused hands gripping the reins of a sturdy pony, her body clad in practical trousers of wool and leather, designed for long rides rather than adornment. These garments, preserved in frozen tombs like those in the Altai Mountains, show intricate tattoos of deer and mythical beasts, inked with bone needles and soot-based pigments, a tedious process that marked rites of passage and social status. Herodotus, writing in his histories, describes these women as fierce hunters and warriors, recounting how they rode into battle alongside men, their skills honed from childhood games of archery and horsemanship. But let's delve into the mundane details that shaped this reality. Daily life for a Scythian nomad involved endless chores, milking mares for fermented kumis, a staple drink that provided sustenance during migrations, tanning hides with urine and bark solutions to create durable clothing, and forging tools in portable hearths fueled by dried dung. The bow, their primary weapon, required meticulous crafting, layers of wood, horn, and tendon glued with fish-derived adhesives, then wrapped and left to cure for months. You might spend hours under the relentless sun, straightening arrows fletched with eagle feathers, ensuring each one flew true for hunting or defense. These women, often called Amazons by the Greeks who encountered their stories through Black Sea colonies, embodied resilience in the face of environmental pressures. Climate fluctuations on the steppe meant unpredictable forage, forcing tribes to move seasonally, covering hundreds of miles with wagons laden with pottery, bronze cauldrons, and woven baskets. Excavations at sites like Pazyryk reveal how they adapted, using cannabis seeds for ritual fumigation in sweat lodges to ease the pains of nomadic life, or brewing herbal teas from steppe plants to treat wounds from skirmishes with rival groups. The Greeks, from their settled city-states, viewed these nomads with a mix of awe and exaggeration, weaving tales of one-breasted warriors who severed a breast for better archery, a myth likely born from misunderstandings of their loose tunics or battle scars. Yet, the true significance lies in the subtle ways these women influenced history. Trade routes connecting Greece to the east brought Scythian goldwork, intricate animal motifs, hammered into thin sheets, and tales that inspired myths. You can envision a Greek merchant in Olbia, a colony on the Black Sea, bartering olive oil for Scythian horses, hearing stories of warrior queens like Tamiris, who reportedly defeated Cyrus the Great of Persia in 530 BCE. Herodotus details the battle's aftermath with detached precision. The queen's forces, using guerrilla tactics adapted from steppe warfare, overwhelmed the Persians in a landscape of rolling hills and hidden ravines. As you linger on these plains, consider the quiet endurance required to thrive here, the repetitive tasks of saddle making, quiver stitching, and herd tending that built a society where gender roles blurred for survival. But what happens when these nomads clash with the structured world of the Greeks, their paths crossing in raids and alliances that blur myth and reality? You're standing now at the edge of a bustling Greek colony, perhaps Olbia, On the northern shores of the Black Sea around 600 BCE, the salty breeze mixes with the scent of drying fish and olive oil. Amphories stacked along the docks in the distance. You hear the clatter of ox carts and the rhythmic chants of merchants haggling over goods, grain, hides, and amber from the far north. This is where the worlds of the sedentary Greeks and the nomadic Scythians collide, their interactions weaving the threads of history and myth that would later birth the Amazon legends. The Scythians, with their horse-drawn wagons and fierce independence, were no mere barbarians to the Greeks. They were vital trading partners and, at times, formidable adversaries. You can feel the tension in the air as a Scythian rider, perhaps a woman with braided hair adorned with bronze beads, dismounts to barter furs for Attic pottery. Herodotus, writing a century later, describes these exchanges with a mix of fascination and bias, noting the Scythians' refusal to adopt Greek customs like temple building or fixed settlements. For the Scythians, life was transient, dictated by the seasons and the needs of their herds. Archaeological evidence from sites like Chertomlake reveals their wealth, golden plaques depicting archers, often female, and intricately worked bridles for horses bred for speed and endurance. These artifacts, unearthed from kurgans, show a society where women's roles extended beyond the domestic. You might picture a Scythian woman, her fingers stained with ochre, etching designs into a leather quiver while her tribe prepares for a raid or a hunt. Her daily tasks sharpening arrowheads with whetstones, weaving hemp ropes for lassos, or repairing felt tents with bone needles required a practical strength that the Greeks, bound by rigid gender norms, found astonishing. These encounters shaped Greek perceptions, but the reality was grounded in survival. The steppes were a contested space, with tribes vying for grazing lands and trade routes. Scythian women, trained from youth to ride and shoot, were integral to defending caravans from rival nomads or launching raids on settled fringes. Excavations at Issyk in Kazakhstan uncovered a golden woman, a warrior buried around the 5th century BCE with a pointed headdress, gold-plated armor, and a sword. Her grave goods mirrors, spindle whorls, and a whip suggest a life balancing combat and craft. You can imagine her mornings spent grinding millet for flatbread, or boiling mare's milk over a dung fire, only to ride out by noon to scout for threats, her bow slung across her back. The Greeks, observing from their stone-walled poleis, spun these realities into myths. The Amazons of legend fierce, matriarchal warriors likely drew from tales of Scythian women who fought to protect their kin, or joined men in battles against Persian incursions. Herodotus recounts a story of Scythian warriors meeting Amazons after a battle, leading to alliances and even marriages, though archaeology suggests such unions were rare. Instead, trade was the true bridge. Scythian gold and horses flowed south, while Greek wine, textiles, and bronze tools moved north. You might see a Greek potter in his workshop, shaping clay vessels inspired by Scythian animal motifs, unaware his designs would outlast his city. Yet, these interactions weren't always peaceful. Border skirmishes flared when Greek colonies encroached on Scythian grazing lands. A Scythian woman, perhaps leading a small band of riders, might ambush a Greek outpost, her arrows tipped with bone for piercing leather armor. These clashes, small and repetitive, fueled the Greek imagination, blending fact with exaggeration. The Scythians' mobility moving camps every few weeks, guided by star patterns and river courses, made them elusive, almost mythical to the Greeks. As you watch a Scythian rider gallop back to the steppe, her silhouette fading into the dusk, you wonder, how did these fleeting encounters solidify into the enduring myth of the Amazons? And what role did they play in shaping Greek views of power and gender? Picture yourself now in the heart of a Greek agora around 450 BCE, where the hum of debate and commerce fills the air. You're surrounded by whitewashed stone columns, the scent of roasted barley, and the chatter of philosophers weaving tales of distant lands. The stories of the Scythian women, those fierce riders of the steppe, have reached Athens, carried by traders and soldiers returning from Black Sea outposts. These tales, filtered through Greek imagination, have crystallized into the myth of the Amazons, warrior women who embody both fascination and fear. You overhear a poet reciting verses about their battles with heroes like Theseus or Heracles, tales etched onto pottery and performed in festivals. But beneath the myth lies a deeper truth, the Scythian women's way of life, rooted in survival and resilience, left a quiet but lasting mark on Greek thought, challenging their rigid notions of gender and power. Asterisk. The Scythians' influence wasn't just in stories. Archaeological finds, like those at Voni in modern Georgia, show Scythian-style arrowheads and horse trappings traded deep into Greek territories, suggesting cultural exchange beyond mere goods. You can imagine a Greek artisan, his hands dusted with clay, studying a Scythian dagger's animal motifs to craft a bronze plaque for a temple. These exchanges shaped Greek art, with Amazonomachi scenes battles against Amazons adorning vases, and friezes like those on the Parthenon. Yet, the reality was less glamorous. Scythian women, as evidenced by burials at Tuva, were often interred with practical tools, spindles, knives, and whetstones reflecting lives of labor as much as warfare. Their days involved grinding grain with stone querns, stitching boots with sinew thread, or tending to injured horses with poultices of steppe herbs, tasks that sustained their tribes through harsh winters. This resilience clashed with Greek ideals of domesticity. In Athens, women were largely confined to the oikos, weaving textiles and managing households, their lives dictated by laws like those of Solon, which limited their public roles. The Scythian women, by contrast, wrote freely, fought when needed, and shared in tribal decisions. As Herodotus notes in his accounts of their councils, you might see a Scythian woman, her face weathered from years on the steppe, negotiating with a Greek merchant over a bale of wool, her authority unquestioned by her kin. These encounters, though fleeting, planted seeds of unease in Greek minds. Plato, in his dialogues, hints at alternative societal models, possibly inspired by such stories, while Aristophanes' comedy Lysistrata toys with women wielding power, perhaps echoing distant Amazonian tales. The myth's entrance, though, came at a cost. The real Scythian women, whose lives balanced combat and craft, were overshadowed by exaggerated legends of man-hating warriors. Their legacy lived on in Greek literature. Homer's Iliad mentions Amazons fighting at Troy, but their historical impact was subtler. They influenced trade networks, with Scythian gold shaping Greek jewelry styles, and their martial prowess informed Greek military tactics, like adopting lighter cavalry inspired by steppe riders. You can envision a Greek hoplite drilling with a new, curved sword modeled on Scythian designs, unaware of the women whose skills inspired it. As you stand in the agora, watching the sun set over Athens, reflect on this. The Scythian women, through their unyielding adaptability, reshaped how a civilization viewed strength and survival. Their story, grounded in the mundane sharpening arrows, herding horses, weaving tents, became a myth that questioned norms and inspired art. How does their quiet defiance, lost in the shadow of legend, remind us that history's most enduring impacts often come from the ordinary lives we overlook? Asterisk. The assault on Theseus, mythical clashes, and real border skirmishes in ancient Thrace. You find yourself standing on a rugged hillside in ancient Thrace around 1200 BCE, where the air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The landscape is wild, dotted with rocky outcrops and scattered villages of thatched huts, their wooden palisades barely holding back the threats of neighboring tribes. This is the borderland between the Greek world and the untamed north, a place of constant tension where myths like Theseus' battle with the Amazons took root. The story of Theseus, the Athenian hero, clashing with warrior women on the fringes of the known world, feels epic in the telling, but the reality was far more grounded, woven from the daily struggles of tribes like the Thracians and their encounters with early Greek settlers. You can hear the distant bleating of goats and the clink of bronze tools as villagers prepare for another uncertain day. Thus, a region spanning modern-day Bulgaria, northern Greece and parts of Turkey, was a melting pot of cultures where pastoralists, farmers and raiders coexisted uneasily. Archaeological sites, like those at Drama and Kerenovo, reveal settlements fortified with earthen ramparts, suggesting a life shaped by the need for defense. You might picture a Thracian warrior, his tunic dyed with madder root, sharpening a bronze spearhead on a grindstone worn smooth from years of use. His village, a cluster of mud brick homes, relied on barley crops and sheep herding. But survival meant vigilance against raids from neighboring tribes, or nomadic groups from the steppes, possibly the Scythians whose women inspired the Amazon. Myths. The myth of Theseus' Amazonian encounter, recounted in later Greek texts like Plutarch's Life of Theseus, likely drew from real skirmishes along these borders. The Greeks, expanding through colonies like Byzantium, often clashed with local tribes over fertile valleys or trade routes. You can imagine a Greek scout, his leather sandals caked with mud, watching from a hilltop as a band of Thracian riders, men and women alike, charges across a river. Ford. These riders, armed with short bows and javelins, were skilled in hit-and-run tactics. Their horses trained to navigate rocky terrain. Excavations at Thracian tumuli, like those near Kazanlak, uncover horse burials with ornate bridles, hinting at the centrality of cavalry in their culture. Daily life here was a grind of repetitive tasks. Women wove wool on upright looms, their fingers threading coarse fibers into cloaks for winter. Men smelted copper in clay crucibles, fueled by charcoal from local forests. These routines were interrupted by raids, often sparked by disputes over grazing rights or stolen livestock. A Thracian woman, perhaps a skilled archer, might spend her morning grinding millet with a stone quern, only to grab her bow by afternoon to repel intruders. Herodotus, writing centuries later, describes Thracian tribes as fiercely independent, their warriors tattooed with geometric patterns to mark lineage or valor, a practice confirmed by inked skin preserved in permafrost graves. These clashes, though small in scale, fueled Greek storytelling. A raid on a Greek outpost, perhaps a few dozen warriors, ambushing a trading post, could be exaggerated into a heroic battle. Theseus, a figure tied to Athens' early kings, became the perfect canvas for such tales. His supposed victory over the Amazons symbolizing Greek order over barbarian chaos. Yet, the Thracians were no mere savages. Their gold work, like the Panegyrish treasure, shows a sophistication that rivaled Greek craftsmanship. You might see a Thracian elder, his beard flecked with grey, hammering gold into a ceremonial cup, unaware his people's raids would inspire myths. As you watch the sun dip below the Thracian hills, you wonder, how did these fleeting, violent encounters between Greeks and Thracians shape the legend of Theseus' Amazonian War? And what drove the tribes to fight so fiercely for their land? You're now in the midst of a Thracian village around 1200 BCE as twilight casts long shadows over the wooden palisades. The air hums with the crackle of fires and the rhythmic thud of a loom, weaving wool into coarse cloth. You can smell the sharp tang of fermenting barley, a staple for the beer-like drink that sustains these people through long winters. This is the heart of Thracian life, where survival hinges on the interplay of trade, raid, and defense, a world far removed from the marble halls of later Greek cities, yet one that shaped the myth of Theseus' clash with the Amazons. The Greeks, pushing northward to establish outposts like Histria, encountered the Thracians in a landscape of rolling hills and dense forests, where alliances were as fleeting as the seasons, and every encounter carried the risk of violence. Archaeological evidence from sites like Papericon reveals the Thracians' complex society, with stone altars for rituals and hoards of bronze tools buried for safekeeping. You might picture a Thracian woman, her hands calloused from years of work, kneading dough made from emmer wheat while keeping a wary eye on the horizon. Her village, a cluster of round huts with reed-thatched roofs, is fortified with ditches and stakes, a testament to the constant threat of raids. These raids weren't grand battles but small, brutal affairs, perhaps a dozen riders stealing cattle or raiding traders carrying amber from the Baltic. Excavations at Southopolis uncover pottery shards and arrowheads, suggesting skirmishes with outsiders, possibly early Greek colonists or nomadic groups like the Scythians, whose warrior women fueled Amazonian tales. The Greeks, with their fledgling colonies, relied on these borderlands for resources, timber, grain, and slaves. You can envision a Greek merchant, his cloak stained with sea salt, bartering wine amphorae for Thracian hides in a tense exchange. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, describes the Thracians as a fragmented people, their tribes united only by necessity or profit. Some, like the Odrysian tribe, grew wealthy taxing Greek trade routes, their leaders adorned with gold torques found in graves like those at Varna. A Thracian warrior, perhaps a young woman trained in archery, might ride alongside her kin, her bow crafted from ash wood and sinew, to protect a caravan or raid a rival's herd, her daily life tanning leather with oak bark, sharpening flint-tipped arrows, or weaving baskets from river reeds was punctuated by these bursts of conflict. These encounters fed the Greek imagination, the myth of Theseus battling Amazons, as later told by poets like Apollodorus, likely grew from stories of Thracian resistance to Greek expansion. A single raid, say, a Thracian band attacking a Greek camp near the Strymon River, could be woven into a heroic saga. You might see a Greek soldier, his bronze greaves gleaming, recounting the speed of Thracian cavalry to awestruck listeners in Athens, the Thracians' hit-and-run tactics using lightweight shields and curved swords, contrasted with the Greeks' heavy hoplite formations, making them seem almost mythical in their elusiveness. Vase paintings from the period, like those in the Athens National Museum, depict Amazons with Thracian-style cloaks and pelter shields, blending local realities with epic exaggeration. Yet, the Thracians weren't just foes. Trade brought mutual benefit. Greek olive oil and pottery flowed north, while Thracian furs and horses moved south. You can imagine a Thracian chieftain, his beard braided with bronze beads, sealing a truce with a Greek envoy over a shared cup of diluted wine. These fragile pacts, often broken by mistrust, shaped the borderland's volatile history. As you watch the village fires flicker under a starlit sky, you wonder, how did these gritty, small-scale conflicts become the epic tale of Theseus' triumph? And what did the Thracians stand to lose in their struggle against encroaching Greeks? You stand now in the bustling port of Athens, around 500 BCE, where the air is thick with the scent of pitch from freshly caulked triremes, and the clamour of dockworkers unloading Thracian timber. The myth of Theseus and his battle with the Amazons has taken root here, recited in torchlit symposia and painted on black figure vases that depict fierce women wielding bows against a heroic king. To the Athenians, this tale is more than entertainment. It's a symbol of their city's triumph over the barbaric north. Yet, as you watch a merchant haggle over Thracian hides, you sense the deeper truth. The story grew from gritty, small-scale skirmishes in Thrace, where real people, farmers, herders, and warriors fought to protect their way of life against Greek expansion. Their struggles, though less glamorous than the myths, left a lasting mark on both cultures. Archaeological sites like those at Vetron reveal the Thracians' resilience. Their settlements, with stone-lined hearths and grain storage pits, show people adapting to constant threats. You can picture a Thracian family, their hands stained with dye from weaving wool, pausing to reinforce their village's palisade with sharpened stakes. Daily life was a cycle of labor, sowing barley in rocky fields, forging bronze knives in clay furnaces, or brewing mead from wild honey to trade with Greek merchants. These tasks, mundane yet vital, sustained communities that faced raids from neighbors or Greek colonists seeking control of fertile lands. Excavations at Sporionovo uncover warrior graves, some of women with javelins and horse gear, suggesting that Thracian women, like their Scythian counterparts, fought alongside men when needed, their lives blending domesticity with defense. The Greeks, meanwhile, used these encounters to craft a narrative of superiority. Plutarch, centuries later, describes Theseus defeating the Amazons near Athens, a story likely inspired by real clashes along Thracian borders. You might imagine a Greek poet in the Agora, his voice rising over the crowd, turning a minor raid, perhaps a Thracian band stealing cattle from a colony, into a saga of heroic conquest. These stories, etched into Athenian identity, justified colonial ambitions. Yet, the Thracians weren't mere victims. Their gold work, like the Rogos and treasures, silver-gilt vessels, rivaled Greek craftsmanship, and their cavalry tactics influenced Greek armies. A Greek strategos, drilling troops with lighter shields inspired by Thracian pelters, might owe his tactics to the very barbarians his city mythologized. Trade, too, wove the cultures together. Thracian horses powered Greek chariots, while Greek wine filled Thracian feasts. You can envision a Thracian chieftain, his cloak pinned with a bronze fibula, sharing a crater of diluted wine with a Greek envoy, their truce fragile but necessary. These exchanges, documented in amphory seals found at Thebes, show a complex relationship of conflict and cooperation. The Thracians' resistance, though, came at a cost. By the 5th century BCE, many tribes were absorbed into Greek or Persian spheres. Their autonomy eroded as colonies like Amphipolis claimed their lands, their stories, distilled into myths, lost the texture of their daily struggles grinding grain, mending nets, or burying their dead with offerings of clay cups. As you gaze across the Athenian harbour, the sun glinting off the Aegean, reflect on this. The Thracians' defiance, rooted in the ordinary acts of survival, became a myth that shaped Greek identity. Their lost battles, fought over muddy fields and grazing rights, echoed in stories of Theseus' valor. How does this transformation of gritty reality into epic legend remind us that history's greatest tales often obscure the quiet resilience of those who lived it? Crafting golden chariots, Bronze Age metallurgists, and their everyday tools were standing in a dusty workshop on the outskirts of a Mycenaean settlement around 1400 BCE, where the air is thick with the acrid tang of molten metal and charred wood. The sun filters through a reed-covered roof, casting dappled light on a dirt floor littered with clay crucibles and stone molds. This is the world of the Bronze Age metallurgist, a craftsman whose skill in forging bronze and, occasionally, gold underpinned the wealth and power of early Greek societies. The myth of golden chariots, like those said to carry gods in Homeric tales, finds its roots here, in the meticulous labor of artisans who transformed raw ore into tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. You can hear the rhythmic clang of a hammer striking bronze, each blow shaping a culture that revered both utility and splendor. The Mycenaeans, centered in places like Pylos and Tiryns, built their economy on metalwork, as evidenced by linear tablets recording bronze allocations for spears and chariot fittings. You might picture a craftsman, his tunic stained with sweat, sorting lumps of copper or mined from Cyprus, mixed with tin from distant Anatolia. His workshop, excavated at sites like Nicoria, is a cramped space with a clay-lined hearth, where he stokes a fire using bellows made from goatskin and wood. The process is grueling, or is crushed with stone pestles, smelted in crucibles over charcoal fires reaching 1,000 to 100 degrees Celsius, and poured into molds carved from schist or limestone. You can imagine him wiping soot from his brow, checking the molten bronze's consistency with a practiced eye, knowing a single flaw could ruin a week's work. Daily life for these artisans was a blend of precision and toil. They shaped axe heads, daggers, and chariot wheel pins, but also decorative items like gold inlays for elite chariots. As found in the shoved graves of Mycenae, these graves, dating to the 16th century BCE, reveal gold cups and diadems crafted with techniques like rapus hammering metal into relief from the reverse side. You might see a metallurgist grinding a bronze chisel on a sandstone block, his hands calloused from years of pounding, or mixing beeswax with clay to create lost wax molds for intricate designs. His tools, tangs, anvils, and wooden mallets were simple but effective, passed down through generations of trial and error. The chariots themselves, central to Mycenaean warfare and prestige, were practical yet symbolic. Linear B records from Nossos list chariot components, wooden frames, leather straps, and bronze fittings assembled by teams of carpenters and smiths. You can envision a worker lashing willow spokes to a wheel, while another hammers gold foil onto a ceremonial chariot's frame, its gleam meant to arrivals. These vehicles, used in battles or processions, were less about divine splendor and more about projecting power, though their cost in labor and materials was immense. A single chariot might require months of work, from felling oak trees to forging. Bronze axles, all coordinated in a society where scribes tracked every ingot. The metallurgists' craft, though, wasn't just technical, it was social. They worked for palatial elites, their output controlled by kings who hoarded metal like currency, yet their skills gave them status as seen in burials with tools as grave goods. You might picture a craftsman pausing to sip watered wine, his workshop humming with apprentices learning to mix alloys. His world, though grounded in repetitive tasks, fueled the myths of gods riding golden chariots across the heavens as you watch the furnace glow. You wonder, how did these artisans' quiet labor shape the Mycenaean world? And what challenges did they face in turning raw metal into symbols of divine and earthly power? You're now deeper inside the Mycenaean workshop around 1400 BCE, where the heat from the hearth makes the air shimmer and the rhythmic thud of hammers echoes. Like a heartbeat, the metallurgist, his face lit by the orange glow of molten bronze, pours a careful stream into a stone mold, crafting a chariot axle pin that will one day roll across a battlefield. This is the pulse of Mycenaean society, where artisans like him, like those whose tools were found at sites like turned raw materials into the instruments of power and prestige. The myth of golden chariots, gleaming in the tales of gods and heroes, owes its splendor to these craftsmen whose daily grind of smelting, hammering, and polishing bridged the mundane and the divine. You can smell the sharp bite of charcoal, smoke and hear the hiss of cooling metal as it meets water. The work was relentless. Archaeological evidence from Mycenae's citadel house reveals workshops cluttered with slag heaps, waste from smelting and broken crucibles, signs of long hours spent refining copper and tin. You might picture the craftsman, his hands scarred from burns, crushing or with a granite pestle, each strike a test of endurance. The bronze alloy, typically 9 parts copper to 1 part tin, required precise ratios. Too much tin made the metal brittle, too little made it soft. He'd test the mix by eye, heating it in a clay furnace fed by hand-pumped bellows, a process that could take hours. Excavations at Poleis show clay to Hieros pipes channeling air into the fire-worn from constant use, evidence of the repetitive labor that defined his life. Beyond utility, these artisans crafted symbols of status, the golden chariots of myth, like those described in the Iliad, were inspired by real ceremonial vehicles adorned with gold foil and inlaid amber. As seen in grave goods from Dendra, you can imagine a metallurgist meticulously hammering thin gold sheets, using wooden tools to press intricate spiral patterns, a task requiring weeks of patience. Linear B tablets from Knossos list gold workers alongside chariot makers, suggesting specialized roles within the palace economy. These craftsmen didn't just serve kings. They enabled displays of wealth that intimidated rivals. A chariot, its frame wrapped in gold leaf, wasn't just a vehicle but a statement, paraded in festivals or burials to honor the elite, yet their lives were tethered to the palace's demands. The Mycenaeans' centralized system, documented in Linear B archives, controlled metal supplies, rationing ingots to trusted smiths. You might see the craftsman bartering surplus bronze for olive oil or wool, his status higher than a farmer's but still beholden to the wain axe, the king. His workshop, often near the palace for oversight, buzzed with apprentices learning to carve molds or polish blades with pumice. These young workers, some as young as 12, carried water, chopped wood or cleaned crucibles, their hands learning to trade through endless repetition. Burials at Prosimna reveal smiths interred with their hammers, a nod to their valued role. Trade underpinned their craft. Copper from Cyprus arrived via ships, as seen in wrecks like Aluburan laden with oxhide-shaped ingots. Tin, scarcer, came through long trade routes from Anatolia or even Afghanistan, making each alloy a product of vast networks. You can envision a trader, his donkey laden with ore, negotiating with the craftsman over a clay cup of wine, their deal sealing the chariot's creation. As you watch the artisan shape a golden inlay, its surface catching the firelight, you wonder, how did the pressures of palace control and distant trade shape these craftsmen's lives? And what did their creations mean to a society poised between survival and splendor? You're now standing outside the towering Lion Gate of Mycenaean around 1350 BCE. As a ceremonial chariot rolls past, its bronze fittings gleaming under the midday sun. The crowd murmurs, awestruck by the gold foil adorning the frame, a symbol of divine favor and royal power. This is the culmination of the metallurgist's labor, a craft that turned sweat and ore into objects that defined a civilization. The myths of golden chariots, carrying gods like Apollo across the heavens in Homeric epics, were born from the work of artisans whose tools and techniques, found in digs at Turns and Pylos, reveal a world of skill and sacrifice. You can hear the creak of the chariot's wheels and smell the faint polish of beeswax on its gilded surface, a testament to countless hours in smoky workshops. These craftsmen were the backbone of Mycenaean society, yet their lives were constrained by its hierarchy. Linear tablets from Knossos show smiths receiving rations, barley, figs, and oil in exchange for their output, their work meticulously recorded by palace scribes. You might picture a metallurgist, his back aching from hours, at the anvil, pausing to eat a meal of coarse bread while his apprentices sweep slag from the floor. His craft, though vital, was grueling. Smelting bronze required maintaining fires for hours, while gold work demanded delicate hammering with bone tools to avoid scratching the soft metal. Excavations at Medea reveal workshops with ventilation shafts, suggesting artisans battled toxic fumes. Their lungs, likely scarred from years of inhaling copper dust, dot the chariots themselves. Beyond their mythic allure were practical tools of war and status. Archaeological finds, like the Dendra chariot fittings, show lightweight frames of ash and leather, reinforced with bronze pins that took days to forge. You can imagine a craftsman testing a wheel's balance, spinning it on a wooden axle, knowing its strength could decide a battle's outcome. These vehicles, used by elite warriors, were also paraded in funerals, as seen in the grave circle A burials, where gold masks and bronze swords accompanied the dead. The metallurgist's role extended to these rituals, crafting inlays that linked the living to the divine. Their work immortalized in stories of gods riding radiant chariots. Yet, the artisan's legacy was bittersweet. Their creations fueled Mycenaean expansion, enabling campaigns against rivals like the Hittites, but also tied them to a rigid system. Palaces hoarded metal, as seen in hoards at Thebes, leaving smiths dependent on elite patronage. You might see a craftsman, his hands stained with verdigris, trading a bronze dagger for a sack of wheat, his skill granting him respect but not freedom. The collapse of Mycenaean society around 1200 BCE, likely due to invasions and trade disruptions, silenced these workshops. Sites like Nicoria show abandoned forges, their hearths cold. As artisans fled or adapted to a simpler life, the myths endured, though, transforming the craftsman's labor into tales of divine splendor. The Iliad's descriptions of Hephaestus forging divine armor echo the real work of these smiths, whose techniques influenced later Greek art. You can envision a poet in a later agora reciting tales of golden chariots, unaware of the calloused hands behind them. Their craft, blending utility and beauty, shaped a culture that revered both war and worship. As you watch the chariot disappear through the gate, its gold catching the fading light, reflect on this. These artisans, through their repetitive toil, built the foundations of a mythic world. Their forgotten workshops, buried under centuries of earth, remind us that history's grandeur often rests on the quiet endurance of those who shaped it. How does their overlooked labor challenge our view of what makes a civilization shine? Hephaestus' workshop, the mundane labor of Greek smiths in volcanic Phrygia standing in a dimly lit forge on the island of Lemnos around 800 BCE, where the air is heavy with the scent of sulfur and molten iron. The ground beneath your feet trembles faintly, a reminder of the volcanic soil that made this island sacred to Hephaestus, the Greek god of smiths and fire. The myths paint Hephaestus as a divine craftsman forging armor for gods in a celestial workshop. But here, in the real forges of the Aegean, you see the gritty reality: mortal smiths, their faces smudged with soot, laboring over glowing hearths to craft tools and weapons that sustained early Greek communities. You hear the bellows wheeze and the sharp clank of a hammer shaping a red-hot blade, each strike echoing the rhythm of survival. Lemnos, with its volcanic deposits rich in iron, or was a hub for metalwork, as evidenced by finds at Hephaestia, where archaeologists uncovered slag heaps and clay furnaces. You might picture a smith, his tunic damp with sweat, shoveling or into a bloomery a low, dome-shaped furnace built from clay and straw. His work is slow and precise. Iron, unlike bronze, demands higher temperatures, around 1,500 degrees Celsius, achieved by pumping air through reed pipes into a fire fed by olive wood charcoal. The process, known as bloom smelting, produces a spongy mass of iron that he hammers for hours to remove impurities, his arms aching from the repetitive blows. Tools found at Chios, like tongs and stone anvils, show the simplicity of their equipment. Honed through generations of trial, daily life for these smiths was a grind of necessity. They forged plowshares for farmers, knives for fishermen, and spearheads for warriors, their output vital to the island's economy. You can imagine a smith pausing to sip watered wine from a clay cup, his hands calloused from gripping hammers made of oak and bronze. His forge, often a low-roofed shed open to the sea breeze, was cluttered with broken molds and charcoal dust. He'd mix clay with crushed seashells to craft crucibles, each one fired in a pit to withstand the heat of molten metal. Excavations at Eretria reveal pottery shards used as scoops for flux limestone or sand to purify iron, a tedious task that could take days to prepare. The connection to Hephaestus wasn't just mythic. Lemnos' volcanic landscape, with its hot springs and tremors, shaped a culture that revered fire as both tool and deity. You might see a smith offering a libation of barley meal to a small altar, a ritual to honor the god believed to guide his hammer. These rituals, noted in later texts like the Homeric hymns, tied the smith's labor to the divine. Even as he sweated over mundane tasks like sharpening a chisel on a grindstone or repairing a cracked bellows with leather patches, his work supported the community. A single iron plow, forged over weeks, could till fields for a village, while a sword might protect it from pirates raiding from the Aegean. Yet, the smith's life was precarious. Volcanic eruptions, like those recorded in ancient Lemnian folklore, could bury forges under ash, while the scarcity of ore meant reliance on trade with mainland Greece or Anatolia. You can envision a trader arriving by boat, bartering iron ingots for amphorae of oil. His negotiations with the smith sealed over a shared meal of bread and fish. The smith's skill, though, gave him status as seen in burials with iron tools as grave goods, a mark of respect for his craft. As you watch the forge's glow flicker against the night, you wonder, how did these smiths, toiling in the shadow of a volatile volcano, balance their craft's demands with the island's unpredictable forces? And what did their labor mean to a world that saw gods in their flames? You're deeper inside the Lemnian forge now, around 800 BCE, where the heat presses against your skin like a living thing, and the air hums with the low roar of the furnace. The smith, his eyes squinting through the haze of smoke, hammers a glowing iron rod into a sickle's curve, each strike precise despite the sweat dripping from his brow. This is the heart of the craft that fueled the myths of Hephaestus, the divine smith whose forge was said to glow beneath volcanoes. But here, on Lemnos, the reality is far earthier, a life of repetitive toil, where every tool and weapon is born from patience and muscle. You can smell the metallic tang of cooling iron and hear the creak of leather bellows, worked by an apprentice whose hands are raw from hours of pumping. The smith's work was central to the island's survival. Archaeological digs at Kaukanesi reveal forges with clay-lined pits and heaps of slag, the gritty byproduct of smelting iron ore mined from Lemnos' volcanic hills. You might picture the smith, his tunic patched from stray sparks, salting lumps of hematite tread brown rocks rich in iron before crushing them with a granite pestle. The process was arduous or had to be roasted to remove moisture, then smelted in a bloomery furnace for hours with charcoal carefully layered to maintain heat. Tools like those found at Polyokni bronze tongs and limestone molds show a craft refined over centuries, but each piece demanded days of labor. From firing the clay crucibles to hammering the brittle bloom into usable iron, beyond utility. These smiths crafted objects of cultural weight. Iron swords like those unearthed at Thermae were not just weapons but symbols of status, often buried with warriors in simple graves lined with stones. You can imagine the smith polishing a blade with pumice, his fingers tracing the edge to ensure it cuts cleanly through leather or hemp. His forge also produced votive offerings, small iron figurines, or pins left at sanctuaries to Hephaestus. As seen in deposits at the Cabarian sanctuary on Lemnos, these rituals tied his labor to the divine, a nod to the god whose mythic hammer echoed his own. A typical day might see him pause to sprinkle barley over a small fire as an offering, the act as routine as sharpening his chisel on a sandstone block. The smith's world was shaped by Lemnos volatility. Volcanic tremors, recorded in ancient oral traditions, could disrupt work, forcing him to rebuild hearths or salvage tools from ash-covered ruins. You might see him inspecting a cracked crucible, deciding whether to patch it with clay or start anew. A task that could delay a commission for weeks. Trade was equally vital. Iron ore was local, but charcoal required felling scarce trees, and tin for bronze came via ships from Anatolia. Excavations of shipwrecks like Cape Gelidonia revealed trade networks bringing metals to Lemnos, where the smith bartered his wares, perhaps a set of fishhooks for olive oil or wool from Chios. His status, though, set him apart. Unlike farmers, bound to fields, the smith's skill earned him respect. As seen in burials with iron hammers as grave goods, you can envision him teaching an apprentice to judge a fire's heat by its color, passing down knowledge that sustained villages. Yet, his life was tethered to the forge's demands, endless hours of hammering, stoking, and sweating in a world where fire was both ally and threat. As you watch the smith shape a glowing spearhead, its form emerging from the rob loom, you wonder, how did the island's volcanic unpredictability test these craftsmen? And what role did their creations play in binding communities to their gods and their land? You're standing now at the edge of a Lemnian sanctuary around 750 BCE, where the flicker of oil lamps casts shadows on a stone altar dedicated to Hephaestus. The air carries the faint tang of iron and sea salt, and you hear the distant clang of a forge, its rhythm a heartbeat of the islands. Life. The myths of Hephaestus, crafting divine weapons in a volcanic workshop, have taken root here, but they're woven from the real labor of smiths whose iron tools and weapons shaped Lemnos' survival and identity. You watch a procession of villagers, their tunics dusted with earth, offer a small iron figurine, a horse, forged with care to the god, a gesture tying their daily grind to the divine. This is the legacy of the smiths, whose work bridged the earthly and the sacred. Archaeological finds at Hephaestia reveal the smith's impact: clay furnaces, worn anvils, and caches of iron blades buried as offerings. You might picture a smith, his face lined from years of heat and toil, finishing a plowshare that will break the island's rocky soil. His craft was vital: iron sickles harvested barley, knives gutted fish, and spearheads deterred raiders. Each piece took days, smelting ore in a bloomery, hammering the bloom into shape and quenching it in water from a nearby spring. Excavations at Chalcis show slag piles and broken crucibles, signs of endless cycles of heating and forging. The smith's hands, scarred from burns, moved with precision, shaping metal with tools like those found at Lefkindi, bronze tongs and stone hammers passed down through generations. These artisans weren't just laborers, they were cultural linchpins. Their forges, often near sanctuaries, doubled as communal hubs where villagers gathered to trade or pray. You can imagine a smith pausing to teach an apprentice how to temper a blade, cooling it slowly to avoid cracks, while neighbors barter wool for nails. His offerings to Hephaestus, small iron pins or rings, as seen in Cabarian deposits, were acts of devotion, linking his craft to the island's volcanic spirit. Yet, his life was precarious. Eruptions like those hinted at in Lemnian myths could bury forges, while trade disruptions, evidenced by sparse tin finds, halted bronze work. You might see him salvaging a cracked hearth, mixing clay with ash to rebuild it, his work delayed by the island's restless geology. The smith's creations also reached beyond Lemnos. Iron tools, traded across the Aegean, supported farms and fleets. while their techniques influenced later Greek smiths. As seen in the iron swords of 7th century Corinth, you can envision a trader, his boat laden with Lemnian knives, exchanging them for Attic pottery, spreading the smith's craft. The myths, too, carried their legacy. Homer's tales of Hephaestus forging Achilles' shield echo the real skill of these artisans, whose ironwork enabled warriors and farmers alike, yet their lives remained humble rations of barley and oil, recorded in early Greek inscriptions, were their pay. Their status tied to skill rather than wealth. As you watch the sanctuary's lamps glow, the smith's hammer still echoing faintly, reflect on this. These craftsmen, toiling in the shadow of a volatile volcano, forged the tools that sustained a way of life and inspired tales of gods. Their labor, buried in slag and sweat, built a bridge between the mundane and the mythic, shaping a culture that revered fire's power. How does their quiet endurance, lost beneath divine stories, remind us that the smallest hands often craft the foundations of history's greatest legends? Order amid primordial chaos, Hesiod's farmers, and the structure of rural Greek life. Imagine yourself standing on the rugged slopes of Mount Helicon in Boeotia, where the air carries the faint scent of olive groves and freshly turned earth. It is the 8th century BCE, and you are in the world of Hesiod, a poet-farmer whose words would echo through the ages, not with the thunder of gods or the clash of heroes, but with the quiet rhythm of plowshares cutting furrows in the soil. Hesiod was no lofty bard singing solely of divine exploits. He was a man of the land, born around 750 BCE in the village of Askra, a place he himself described as bad in winter, sultry in summer, and good at no time. His life was steeped in the primordial chaos that Greek mythology often evoked, the swirling void from which order emerged, but he sought to impose structure upon it through the mundane, yet essential patterns of rural existence. Hesiod's seminal work, Works and Days, composed around 700 BCE, serves as a bridge between the mythic disorder of his other poem, Theogony, and the ordered drudgery of everyday farming. In Theogony, he chronicled the birth of the cosmos from chaos, the violent succession of gods, and the establishment of Zeus's rule. But in Works and Days, he turns his gaze earthward, addressing his wayward brother Perses, who had cheated him out of their inheritance through crooked judges. This personal grievance frames the poem as a didactic guide, urging honest labor as the antidote to injustice. You can picture Hesiod reciting these lines by a flickering hearth, his voice steady and unadorned, emphasizing that in a world born from chaos, human survival depended on diligence, measure, and respect for the natural order. Rural Greek life in Hesiod's era was a tapestry of small, family-run farms scattered across the hilly terrain of central Greece. These were not vast estates, but modest plots, typically 10 to 20 acres, where a household comprising the farmer, his wife, children, and perhaps a few slaves or hired hands eked out a living from wheat, barley, olives, grapes, and figs. The structure was hierarchical yet interdependent. The head of the household, the oikonomos, managed resources with an eye toward self-sufficiency or autarkia. You would rise before dawn, as Hesiod advises, to tend to the oxen, those vital beasts yoked to wooden plows reinforced with bronze tips. The soil, often thin and rocky, demanded constant attention. Erosion from winter rains could strip away topsoil, so farmers built terraces with stone walls, a labor-intensive task passed down through generations. Social norms reinforced this ordered existence. Hesiod stresses the importance of good neighbors, those who lend tools or share in communal threshing, warning that a bad neighbor is as great a plague as a good one is a blessing. Villages like Askra were clusters of thatched roof homes, centered around a communal well or threshing floor, where disputes were settled by elders invoking Zeus's justice. Marriage was pragmatic. Hesiod counsels marrying a woman in her 5th year of maturity, around age 19, to ensure she could be molded into a dutiful wife who spins wool, manages stores, and bears children to work the fields. Women's roles were confined to the household, grinding grain into flour or weaving cloth from flax, while men handled the heavier outdoor labors. Yet, This division was not rigid in harvest seasons. Everyone pitched in, underscoring the collective resilience needed to combat famine or drought. Farming practices followed a seasonal calendar attuned to the stars and weather signs, a system Hesiod details with precision. As autumn approached, you would plough the fallow fields 3 times to aerate the earth. So, in barley and wheat in October when the Pleiades set. Tools were simple: the ard plough for scratching the surface, sickles for reaping, and winnowing baskets. To separate grain from chaff, Hesiod warns against idleness, personifying it as a path to ruin. Much like the myth of Pandora releasing woes upon humanity, he divides history into 5 ages from golden to iron, lamenting the current era's toil, but affirming that hard work could yield prosperity. Superstitions wove through daily routines avoid sailing in certain months or cutting wood on unlucky days, blending piety with practicality. In this framework, the farmer became a microcosm of cosmic order, taming chaos through routine. Hesiod's maxims, like observe due measure, moderation is best in all things, echoed the Delphic oracle's wisdom, promoting balance in an unpredictable world. Yet, as you contemplate these patterns, a question lingers: how did these rural structures withstand the encroaching pressures of trade, warfare, and social upheaval that loomed on the horizon? Picture yourself trudging through the fields of Boeotia, the late autumn sun casting long shadows across the freshly sown furrows. It's around 700 BCE, and you're living the life Hesiod described in Works and Days, where every task is a step toward wresting order from the chaos of an unforgiving world. The rural Greek farmer, like you, was not just battling rocky soil or fickle rains, but also navigating a web of social and economic pressures that tested the fragile structure of village life. Hesiod's teachings, rooted in his own disputes with his brother Perses, reveal a deeper struggle: how to maintain harmony in a society where greed, rivalry, and external forces threatened to unravel the communal bonds that held places like Askra together. The farmstead was the heart of rural existence, a microcosm of order built on relentless labor. You'd wake to the crowing of roosters, checking the granary where Cleipithoi stored barley and wheat enough, hopefully, to last through winter. Hesiod's advice was granular: repair your cart in summer, sharpen your sickle before harvest, and always have a spare plough beam ready. These weren't mere suggestions, but survival strategies, honed over generations in a landscape where a single bad harvest could mean starvation. The average yield was low, perhaps 5 to 10 bushels of grain per acre, and crop failures were common, due to drought or pests. To hedge against this, you'd diversify, planting lentils and chickpeas alongside cereals, and tending olive trees whose fruit could be pressed into oil for trade or sustenance. Beyond the fields, village life revolved around reciprocity and mutual obligation. You joined neighbors at the threshing floor, where oxen trampled grain to separate kernels from chaff, a communal effort often accompanied by shared meals of bread and watered wine. Hesiod emphasized fairness in these interactions: give to one who gives, but do not give to one who does not. Disputes, like the one between Hesiod and Perses, were settled by village elders or, in graver cases, by magistrates in a nearby town. These local courts, though, were often swayed by bribes, as Hesiod bitterly noted, reflecting a tension between the ideal of divine justice and human corruption. The gods loomed large in this world. Zeus oversaw justice, Demeter blessed them. Harvest stand offerings of grain or wine were made at small altars to secure their favor. Economic pressures were beginning to reshape this rural order. By Hesiod's time, trade was expanding, driven by Phoenician merchants and early Greek colonies. You might barter surplus grain or olive oil for bronze tools or pottery at a regional market. But this exposed villages to new inequalities. Wealthier farmers with larger plots or better access to trade routes could afford more slaves or hired laborers, while poorer ones fell into debt. Hesiod's warnings against idleness and his praise for thrift reflect a growing anxiety about social stratification. In Askra, most households owned a few slaves captives from minor raids or impoverished locals, but their labor was not enough to transform small farms into estates. Instead, the family remained the core unit, with children trained early to weed fields or herd goats, The seasons dictated your rhythm, but so did the stars. Hesiod's calendar, tied to celestial markers like the rising of Sirius or the setting of Orion, guided planting and harvesting. You'd watch for signs of croaking, frogs signaling rain, or a cuckoo's call marking spring to time your work. Women, though largely confined to domestic tasks, played a critical role in this cycle, preserving food or weaving woolen cloaks for winter. Yet, as trade grew and neighboring poleis like Thebes expanded, new pressures emerged. Young men were increasingly drawn to mercenary work or maritime trade, lured by promises of wealth beyond the plough. This shift raised a question: could the traditional structures of rural life, so carefully outlined by Hesiod, endure the pull of a wider, more connected world? As you stand in the dim light of a Boeotian evening, circa 700 BCE, the fields are own. You are quiet, save for the rustle of wind through olive branches. The life of a farmer in Hesiod's world, as you've lived it, is a testament to resilience, a daily effort to carve order from the chaos of nature and human ambition. In Works and Days, Hesiod not only prescribed the routines of ploughing, sowing, and reaping, but also grappled with the fragility of this ordered existence. As Greece stood on the cusp of transformation, the rural structures he championed rooted in family, community, and divine reverence faced mounting pressures from trade, social inequality, and the stirrings of a more complex society. How did these farmers, bound to their ancestral plots, navigate the final outcomes of their world's slow unraveling? The climax of Hesiod's narrative lies not in dramatic upheaval, but in the quiet persistence of his ideals. His feud with Perses, sparked by a disputed inheritance, resolves not in triumph but in a call to virtue: work hard, honor the gods, and live justly. For you, the farmer, this meant adhering to a moral code as rigorous as the seasonal calendar. Harvest time, in late spring, was the culmination of months of labor. You'd reap barley with a sickle, bundle it into sheaves, and thresh it on a stone-lined floor, hoping for a yield to sustain your household and leave a surplus for trade. Hesiod's advice to store grain carefully and avoid debt underscores the razor-thin margin between prosperity and ruin. A single storm could destroy a crop, and without communal support, neighbors lending oxen or sharing labor, survival was uncertain. Yet, the world was changing. By the late 8th century BCE, Greece was entering the Archaic period, marked by the rise of city-states and expanding trade networks. You might encounter merchants from Corinth or Euboea at a market in Thebes, offering imported pottery or iron tools. These exchanges brought wealth but also disruption. Some farmers, tempted by profits, overcommitted to cash crops like olives, risking food security. Others, unable to compete, lost land to wealthier neighbors, becoming tenant farmers or hired hands. Hesiod's warnings against greed and his praise for moderation reflect a deeper fear that the communal bonds of rural life were eroding. His 5 Ages myth, ending in the toil-filled Iron Age, laments a world where justice falters. Yet he holds out hope that honest labor can restore balance. The legacy of Hesiod's farmers lies in their endurance. Their small scale, diversified agriculture sustained Greece through its early history, laying the groundwork for the cultural and intellectual flowering of the classical period. The terraces they built, some still visible today, symbolize a practical resilience that outlasted empires. Hesiod's emphasis on justice and hard work influenced later Greek thought. From Solon's reforms to Plato's ethics, even as poleis grew and rural life waned, the farmer's ethos, self-reliance, community, and respect for natural cycles remained a cultural touchstone. Reflecting on this, you might wonder how Hesiod's world resonates today in an era of industrial agriculture and global markets. The farmer's struggle to impose order on chaos feels distant yet familiar. Modern challenges, climate change, economic disparity echo the precariousness of Hesiod's Iron Age. His call to observe due measure speaks to a timeless need for balance, reminding us that even in mundane routines, there lies a profound act of creation, order forged from chaos, one furrow at a time. The tight nomarchy, echoes of historical power struggles in early Mycenaean society, into the shadowed halls of a Mycenaean palace around 1400 BCE, where the air is thick with the scent of olive oil lamps and the murmur of scribes scratching clay. Tablets! You are in the Bronze Age world of the Mycenaeans, a civilization of warrior kings and fortified citadels, whose myths would later inspire Hesiod's Theogony, the epic tale of the Titanomachy, the cosmic war between the Titans and the Olympian gods led by Zeus. May seem like pure fantasy, but it resonates with the gritty power struggles that shaped early Mycenaean society. This was a time of ambition, betrayal, and the forging of hierarchies, where human conflicts mirrored the divine battles sung by poets centuries later. The Mycenaeans, flourishing from roughly 1600 to 1100 BCE, were a people of the Peloponnese, Crete, and the Aegean Islands. Their world was one of palatial centers. Think Mycenae with its Lion Gate, or Pylos with its frescoed halls where Wainax kings ruled over a patchwork of local chieftains and farmers. The Lineae tablets, discovered in sites like Knossos and Pylos, reveal a highly organized society, with bureaucrats recording grain allocations, bronze weapons, and chariot parts. Yet, beneath this order lay a volatile reality. Power was not inherited smoothly. It was seized through alliances, marriages, or brute force. The Titanomachy, with its tale of Zeus overthrowing his father Cronus, echoes these earthly contests for dominance, where new rulers displaced old ones in a cycle of violence and legitimacy. Imagine yourself as a minor noble in this world, perhaps overseeing a small estate near Mycenae. Your days involve managing barley harvests or supervising bronzesmiths, but your loyalty is to the Wainax, whose authority rests on his ability to protect and provide. The palaces were not just residences, they were economic and military hubs. You'd witness convoys of ox carts delivering wool or wine, while warriors trained with boar-tusk helmets and figure-8 shields. The Wainax maintained power through a network of basilius local leaders, who swore fealty but often harbored ambitions of their own. Rivalries simmered, much like the mythic Titans plotting against Uranus or Cronus devouring his children to secure his throne. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture. At Pylos, the palace of Nestor held storerooms brimming with olive oil jars, enough to supply a small army. Fortifications, like the massive Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, suggest a society on edge, fearing raids or internal rebellion. The Titanomachy's 10-year war, with its earth-shaking battles, mirrors the protracted conflicts of this era. Perhaps not a single war, but a series of skirmishes over trade routes or fertile land. The myth's Cyclops forging Zeus's thunderbolts recall Mycenaean smiths crafting bronze daggers, their work tying divine favor to martial prowess. Socially, life was stratified. Below the Wainax and nobles were artisans, farmers, and slaves, many of whom were captives from raids. Women, often unnamed in Lineae records, wove textiles or ground grain, their labor sustaining the palace economy. Religion permeated this world. Offerings to deities like Poseidon or Potnia, a mother goddess, were routine, reflecting a belief that divine favor ensured stability. Yet, as in the Titanomachy, where Zeus needed allies like the Hecatonches, human rulers relied on fragile coalitions. What happens when those alliances fray and ambition outweighs loyalty? You are standing in the bustling courtyard of a Mycenaean palace, circa 1400 BCE, surrounded by the clatter of pottery and the lowing of oxen. The air hums with the tension of a society where power is both a prize and a burden, much like the divine struggles in the Titanomachy, where Zeus battled the Titans to claim supremacy. In the Mycenaean world, the Wainax, the king, sits at the apex of a fragile hierarchy, but his rule is not absolute. The echoes of mythic rebellion resonate in the real-world rivalries and alliances that defined early Mycenaean society as local. Lords, priests, and warriors vied for influence in a landscape of opportunity and peril. The palace, whether at Mycenae, Pylos, or Turin's, was the nerve center of Mycenaean life. You might be a scribe, etching Lineae symbols onto clay tablets to track the flow of resources. 3,000 liters of olive oil to a sanctuary, 200 bronze ingots for spearheads, or wool for 50 cloaks. These records, unearthed by archaeologists, reveal a tightly controlled economy where the Wainax distributed goods to maintain loyalty. But this system was a double-edged sword. Local Basilius chieftains who governed outlying villages owed tribute but could withhold it if they sensed weakness. Much like Cronus's fear of his children in the Titanomachy, a Wainax had to watch for betrayal. Rival palaces, like those at Mycenaean and Argos, competed for dominance over fertile plains or trade routes to Crete and the Levant, fostering a climate of mistrust. Daily life for you, perhaps a mid-tier official, revolved around maintaining this delicate balance. You'd oversee farmers delivering barley to the palace granary, or inspect chariots for the Achaean elite warriors. The Mycenaeans were skilled in war graves at Mycenae contained daggers inlaid with gold, and scenes of lion hunts, symbols of martial prowess. Yet warfare was costly. Raids on coastal settlements or rival strongholds brought slaves and loot but drained resources. The Titanomachy's prolonged conflict, with its alliances of gods and monsters, mirrors these drawn-out struggles where victory often hinged on securing allies. You might negotiate with a neighboring Basilius, offering wine or a marriage alliance. To ensure his spears stayed loyal, religion played a critical role in legitimizing power. You'd participate in sacrifices, perhaps a bull for Poseidon, whose name appears frequently in Linear tablets believing divine favor secured harvests and victories. Priestesses, especially those serving Potnia, wielded influence, managing sacred lands that supplied the palace. This spiritual authority could tip political scales. Much as the Titaness Rhea aided Zeus by hiding him from Cronus, women in Mycenaean society, while rarely visible in leadership roles, were integral to the economy, spinning wool or producing perfumed oils for trade. Their labor, like that of the low-born, underpinned the palace's wealth but offered little personal power. External pressures loomed larger as Mycenaean society expanded. Contact with Minoan Crete brought luxury goods, ivory, faience, ostrich eggs, but also competition. By 1450 BCE, Mycenaeans had overtaken Knossos, possibly through conquest, absorbing Minoan administrative techniques but also their vulnerabilities. Trade with Hittites and Egyptians enriched palaces but exposed them to distant conflicts, as in the Titanomachy, where Zeus's victory required consolidating power. Mycenaean rulers faced a growing challenge: how to unify a fractured society when ambition and external threats could ignite chaos at any moment. You stand on the ramparts of Mycenae's citadel, circa 1350 BCE, gazing across the Argolid plain as dust rises from a distant caravan of ox carts. The Mycenaean world, with its palaces and power struggles, feels as volatile as the mythic Titanomachy, where Zeus's triumph over the Titans marked a new divine order. Here, in the gritty reality of Bronze Age Greece, the Wainax and his allies fought to maintain control amid rivalries, economic pressures, and the looming spectre of collapse. The resolution of these struggles shaped not just the Mycenaean era, but the myths that would define Greek culture, revealing how human ambition and resilience forged stability from chaos. The Mycenaean palace system, at its peak, was a marvel of organization. You, perhaps a trusted overseer, would witness the Wainax orchestrating a delicate balance, rewarding loyal Basilius with bronze armor, ensuring priests received sacrificial wine, and distributing grain to laborers. Linear tablets from Pylos show meticulous records: 1,000 to 100 liters of barley to a village, 50 sheep for a festival, reflecting a centralized economy designed to prevent rebellion. Yet, this order was fragile. Like Zeus binding the Titans in Tartarus, the Wainax had to suppress dissent. Archaeological evidence, such as burned layers at some sites, hints at internal revolts or raids, possibly by disenfranchised locals or rival palaces. The Titanomachy's narrative of betrayal, Cronus against Uranus, Zeus against Cronus, mirrors these earthier power shifts, where a new Wainax might seize the throne through force or cunning. The resolution of these struggles often came through strategic consolidation. You'd see the Wainax strengthen alliances via marriages, tying his lineage to powerful families, or by hosting feasts in frescoed megarons to display wealth. Military might was crucial. The Achaemenid warriors, equipped with chariots and bronze-tipped spears, patrolled trade routes to secure imports like tin from Anatolia. The Mycenaeans' conquest of Crete around 1450 BCE, absorbing Minoan wealth and scribes, bolstered their power but stretched their resources. By 1300 BCE, palaces were fortifying walls and digging cisterns, as seen at Mycenae, signaling fear of external threats, perhaps the sea peoples or rival Greeks. The Titanomachy's final battle, with Zeus wielding thunderbolts, parallels these desperate defenses, where survival hinged on decisive action. The outcome, however, was bittersweet. The Mycenaean system, like Zeus's hard-won rule, held for centuries but sowed seeds of its own downfall. Over-reliance on palace economies made them vulnerable to disruption. A single failed harvest or broken trade route could starve a citadel. By 1200 BCE, many palaces, pylons, turrets were destroyed, possibly by invasions or internal collapse, ushering in a dark age. Yet, the Mycenaeans' legacy endured. Their myths, carried orally by bards, inspired Hesiod's Theogony, transforming historical power struggles into cosmic tales. Their roads and trade networks laid foundations for archaic Greece's city-states. Reflecting on this, you might see parallels in modern power dynamics, nations vying for resources, leaders balancing alliances against betrayal. The Mycenaeans teach us that order, whether divine or human, is hard-won and fleeting. Their citadels crumbled, but their stories of resilience, like Zeus's triumph, endure as a reminder, even in chaos. The struggle for control shapes the future in ways that echo across millennia. Hubris in the Agora, everyday arrogance and social norms in classical Athens. Picture yourself threading through the bustling Agora of Athens around 30 BCE, where the air hums with the chatter of merchants, the clink of coins, and the sharp scent of fish and olive oil. This is the heart of classical Athens, a city at the zenith of its power during the Golden Age. Yet beneath its democratic ideals and marble temples lies a quieter struggle, the tension between individual ambition and the social norms that held the polis together. The concept of hubris, excessive pride or arrogance, was not just a moral failing in myths, but a daily reality in the Agora, where ordinary Athenians navigated a complex web of etiquette, status, and obligation to maintain communal harmony. The Agora was more than a marketplace. It was the civic and social hub of Athens, sprawling at the foot of the Acropolis. As you walk its dusty paths, you pass stalls selling barley bread, figs, and clay pots, while philosophers like Socrates linger near the Stoa Basileos, probing passers-by with questions. You're likely a citizen, perhaps a craftsman or small landowner, dressed in a simple woolen chiton. Your status grants you a vote in the assembly. But in the Agora, social norms dictate your behavior. Athenians valued Sophrosyne self-restraint, and hubris was its antithesis, a behavior that could disrupt the delicate balance of a society proud of its egalitarianism, yet stratified by wealth and class. Daily life here was governed by unwritten rules. You'd greet acquaintances with a nod, careful not to boast about a recent sale or a son's victory in the pancration, lest you invite accusations of hubris. Athenians were quick to judge those who flaunted wealth or spoke to boldly merchants, who haggled too aggressively, or politicians who swaggered past the statue of Hermes could be mocked or shunned. Legal records, like those from the orator Demosthenes, describe lawsuits over insults or perceived arrogance, showing how seriously Athenians took social decorum. Even in the democratic assembly, where you might debate war with Sparta, shouting over others risked being seen as hubristic, undermining your influence. The Agora's diversity amplified these tensions. You'd rub shoulders with metics, resident foreigners who ran stalls but lacked citizen rights, and slaves fetching water for wealthy households. Women, rarely seen in the Agora's heart, managed domestic affairs or sold goods in quieter corners, their presence constrained by norms of modesty. Yet, hubris could erupt anywhere. A young aristocrat shoving past a farmer, a potter claiming his wares surpassed all others. Such acts invited gossip, or worse, the asundalia, a public accusation of endangering the state, often tied to arrogant behavior. The trial of Archaeological in the 15 BCE for defacing sacred statues shows how hubris could escalate. From personal failing to civic threat, religion reinforced these norms. You'd pause at a small altar to offer barley to Athena, seeking favor while signaling piety. Festivals like the Mycenaean, where citizens processed through the agora, celebrated communal unity, but even here, displays of wealth-lavish chariot teams or oversized offerings could spark resentment. The gods Athenians believed punished hubris, as in the myth of Niobe, whose boastfulness led to her children's slaughter. In the agora, human judgment was just as swift. But as you navigate this crowded space, a question lingers. How did Athenians balance personal ambition with the pressure to conform, when the stakes of hubris could unravel both individual lives and the poleis itself? You are weaving through the crowded agora of Athens around the 30 BCE. The sun beating down on the packed earth as vendors hawk their wares and citizens debate politics. Under the shade of a plane tree, the pulse of classical Athens is palpable here. But so is the undercurrent of hubris, that dangerous arrogance that threatens the social fabric. As a citizen, perhaps a sandal maker or olive merchant, you navigate a world where every gesture, word, and transaction is scrutinized for signs of overstepping. The agora is not just a marketplace, but a stage where personal ambition clashes with the unwritten rules of Sophrosyne self-control that Athenians prized to keep their polis. Cohesive, social norms in the agora were a delicate dance. You'd haggle over a basket of figs, careful to keep your tone respectful, knowing that a sharp word could brand you as hubristic. Athenians expected modesty in public, a loud boast about your pottery outshining a rival's might. Draw glares, or whispered complaints, ostracism, a democratic tool where citizens voted to exile those deemed too powerful or arrogant, loomed as a real threat. Names like the Mysticals, ostracized in 471 BCE for his perceived overreach, served as warnings. Even in casual encounters, you'd avoid walking too proudly past the altar of the 12 gods, lest you seem to challenge divine or human authority. The agora's layout, open yet watched by statues of gods and heroes, reinforced this scrutiny. The diversity of the agora amplified these tensions. You'd pass metics, foreign artisans selling dyed cloth, who, despite their economic contributions, were excluded from political life and expected to defer to citizens, slaves, carrying amphorae of wine, or sweeping stalls were omnipresent but invisible in status, their labor enabling the leisure of citizen debates. Women, though rarely central in the agora, sold bread or garlands in quieter corners, their presence governed by strict norms of propriety. A woman speaking to boldly risked accusations of hubris, as did a metic who demanded equal treatment. Legal texts like those preserved in Lysias's speeches recount disputes where insults or slights escalated to court, showing how hubris could fracture social bonds. Religion was a constant undercurrent. You might offer a small clay figurine at a shrine to Hermes, patron of commerce, to ensure a good day's trade. The gods were believed to punish hubris. Think of Tantalus, eternally tormented for his arrogance. Athenians mirrored this divine justice in their laws, the Graphi Hybrios, a public lawsuit against hubristic acts like assault or public disrespect, could lead to fines or exile. The trial of Meletus against Socrates in 399 BCE, though framed as impiety, hinged on perceptions of intellectual arrogance, showing how hubris extended beyond physical acts to ideas that challenged norms. Yet, ambition was not easily stifled. The agora buzzed with young aristocrats flaunting new wealth from trade or military victories, their fine cloaks and loud laughter testing the limits of decorum. Democratic Athens celebrated individual excellence. Think of Pericles' soaring funeral oration, but demanded it serve the polis. As you move through this vibrant space, where every interaction tests the balance between self-assertion and restraint, a question emerges: how did Athenians enforce these norms when the temptations of power, wealth, and glory grew ever stronger? In their golden age, you linger in the agora of Athens, circa the 30 BCE. As twilight softens the edges of the bustling square, the hum of commerce fades. but the tension of hubris, that perilous arrogance threatening the harmony of the polis, lingers in every glance and whispered judgment. As a citizen navigating this democratic heart of classical Athens, you've seen how social norms, rooted in Sophrosyne self-restraint, govern interactions. Yet the pull of ambition constantly tests these boundaries. The resolution of this struggle, played out in the Agora's daily dramas, reveals how Athenians enforced order and what happened when hubris tipped the balance. Shaping both their society and its enduring lessons, the Agora was a crucible for policing hubris. You'd witness citizens correcting each other's behavior through subtle means, mocking a boastful merchant or shunning a politician who strutted too confidently past the stoa of Zeus. More formally, the legal system acted as a bulwark. The Graphi Hybrios allowed anyone to prosecute acts of arrogance, from physical assaults to public insults, with penalties ranging from fines to exile. Court speeches, like those of Demosthenes, detail cases where citizens accused rivals of hubristic behavior, say, a wealthy man humiliating a poorer one in the Agora to restore communal balance. Ostracism was the ultimate check. Every year, you could scratch a name on a potsherd, voting to banish figures like Alcibiades, whose flamboyant arrogance in the 15 BCE, tied to vandalizing sacred statues, sparked public outrage. These mechanisms ensured that individual ambition served the polis, not undermined it. Yet, enforcing norms was never simple. The Agora's diversity, citizens, metics, slaves, and occasional women created friction. A metic overstepping by demanding citizen-like respect risked a lawsuit. A woman selling olives too assertively might face scorn. Even Socrates, pacing the Agora's edges, was accused of hubris for his relentless questioning, culminating in his 399 BC trial and death sentence. His case shows how hubris extended beyond actions to ideas that challenged Athenian values. Religion reinforced this order. You'd join processions like the Panathenaea, offering Athena a woven peplos to affirm communal piety, but lavish displays, say, an aristocrat's oversized sacrifice could stir resentment, echoing myths like Arachne's punishment for defying Athena. The outcome of this struggle was a fragile equilibrium. Athens thrived on its citizens' ambition. Think of the Parthenon's grandeur or victories at Salamis. But hubris could destabilize it. The Peloponnesian War for 31 to 400 for BCE, fueled partly by Athens' overconfident expansion, reflects this. On a grand scale, in the Agora, small acts of restraint, sharing profits, honoring neighbors preserved the polis's cohesion, allowing it to weather crises. But when hubris prevailed, as in Alcibiades' defection to Sparta, the consequences rippled outward, weakening Athens' unity. Reflecting on this, the Agora's lessons resonate today. Modern societies, like Athens, grapple with balancing individual ambition against collective good. Think of social media, amplifying personal boasts or political scandals, echoing Alcibiades' fall. The Athenians' obsession with Sophrosyne reminds us that communities thrive on mutual respect, not unchecked ego. Their story, played out in the dusty Agora, asks us to consider, in our own pursuit of success, how do we avoid the hubris that risks unraveling the bonds holding us together? Nemesis' quiet reckoning, forgotten legal disputes, and moral codes in Greek polysemogenious self-standing in the Agora of a small Greek polis, perhaps Thebes or Corinth, around for 50 BCE. The air carries the scent of roasted barley and the murmur of citizens gathered near a stone platform where a dispute is unfolding. This is not the grand Athens of Pericles, but a humbler city-state, where the goddess Nemesis retribution personified seems to hover over every quarrel. In the Greek poleis, legal disputes, often mundane, were the crucible where moral codes were tested and enforced. These forgotten cases, recorded on papyrus or whispered in local law, reveal how ordinary citizens navigated justice, honor, and the delicate balance of community life in classical Greece. The poleis were tight-knit societies, each with its own laws but united by a shared moral framework rooted in justice and fear of divine retribution. As a citizen, say, a potter or vineyard owner, you'd be keenly aware of Nemesis. The the deity who punished those who overstepped through arrogance or deceit. Disputes in the agora, often overland bound. Ares, debts, or insults were not just personal, they threatened the polis's harmony. Legal systems varied. In Thebes, a council of elders might judge, while Corinth relied on magistrates elected annually. Unlike Athens' democratic courts, smaller poleis leaned on tradition, with oral testimonies outweighing written contracts, which were rare outside major cities. Picture yourself involved in a typical dispute. Your neighbor claims your olive trees encroach on his plot. You'd face him before a magistrate in the agora where onlookers farmers, weavers. Even metics weigh in with murmurs. Evidence was simple: boundary stones, witnesses, or oaths sworn to Zeus. The moral code demanded truthfulness. Perjury invited Nemesis's wrath, believed to bring crop failures or family misfortune. Lawsuits, as seen in surviving orations like those of Isaias, often hinged on personal reputation. If you were known for fair dealings, your word carried weight. A history of greed could doom your case. Women rarely appeared in court, their interests represented by male kin, reflecting a society where public roles were male-dominated. These disputes revealed the polis's social fabric. You'd live in a world where honor was currency. A man who cheated a debtor risked ostracism, not formal exile as in Athens, but social shunning. Slaves and metics, though vital to the economy, had no legal standing. Their disputes were settled privately or through a citizen's intervention. Religion permeated justice before testifying. You'd pour wine at a small altar, invoking the god's oversight. The moral code wasn't just legal, but communal. Your actions reflected on your family and oikos household. A single act of dishonesty could tarnish your lineage, as myths like that of Tantalus, cursed for his crimes, reminded everyone. Yet, the system wasn't flawless. Magistrates could be swayed by bribes, as Hesiod lamented a century earlier, and wealthier citizens often held sway. In a small polis, personal grudges fueled disputes, turning petty quarrels into feuds. The balance between individual rights and communal good was precarious, and Nemesis's reckoning wasn't always fair. As you stand in the agora, watching the magistrate deliberate, a question lingers. How did these poleis ensure justice when human flaws, greed, envy, or favoritism threatened to tip the scales? You're back in the agora of a modest Greek polis, say, Argos or Megara, around for 50 BCE, where the midday sun casts sharp shadows on the stone platform where disputes are settled. The crowd murmurs as the citizens argue over a debt unpaid for a shipment of wool, their voices rising but careful not to offend the magistrate. In these classical Greek city-states, legal disputes were not just about settling scores, they were a public performance of Dike justice, watched closely by Nemesis, the goddess who ensured no one escaped the consequences of moral overreach. As a citizen, perhaps a baker or a bronzesmith, you navigate a world where every quarrel tests the moral codes binding the polis, revealing the intricate mechanisms that kept society intact. Justice in smaller poleis was less formalized than in Athens. Relying on custom and community pressure, you'd present your case before a magistrate or a panel of elders, chosen for their reputation for fairness. Evidence was straightforward, a neighbor testifying to a boundary stone's placement, a clay tablet noting a loan of 10 drachmas, or an oath sworn on Hestia's altar. These oaths carried weight. Lying under divine scrutiny risked Nemesis's curse, perhaps a blighted harvest or a child's illness. Surviving inscriptions, like those from Gorton in Crete, detail laws on debts or inheritance, showing how disputes were resolved with fines or labor rather than imprisonment, which was rare. The goal was restoration, not punishment, preserving the polis's cohesion. The moral code extended beyond the courtroom. You'd live by an unspoken rule: honor your obligations. Failing to repay a debt or respect a neighbor's property could brand you as untrustworthy, cutting you off from communal work like harvesting or festivals. Social hierarchy shaped these interactions. Citizens held sway, while metics, foreign residents running shops, depended on a citizen patron to represent them in disputes. Slaves, vital for grinding grain or tending vines, had no legal voice. Their grievances were settled by masters, often harshly. Women, too, were sidelined, their disputes handled by fathers or husbands, as seen in legal texts from Corinth where men contested dowries on behalf of sisters. This exclusion reinforced a moral order prioritizing male citizen authority, yet cracks appeared in this system. Wealthier citizens with larger estates or trade connections could sway magistrates with gifts, olive oil, a fine cloak echoing Hesiod's complaints about crooked judgments. Personal vendettas often escalated disputes. A feud over a vineyard could spiral into years of mutual slights. Public opinion was a powerful force. You'd hear gossip in the agora about a man who cheated a metic, or a woman who defied her husband's authority, shaping reputations more than any verdict. Religion underpinned this moral framework. You'd offer barley at a shrine before testifying, believing Zeus Hawkios, Zeus of oaths, watched. Myths like Orestes' pursuit by the Erinyes for his crimes reminded you that Nemesis struck those who upset the balance. As disputes multiplied, especially in thriving poleis tied to trade routes, the strain on traditional justice grew. Merchants from abroad brought new ideas, challenging local customs, while ambitious citizens pushed against communal norms for personal gain. Standing in the agora, you sense the tension. How could these poleis maintain their moral codes when external pressures and internal rivalries threatened to erode the very justice Nemesis was meant to enforce? You stand in the fading light of the agora in a Greek polis like Scythian, around for 50 BCE, where the crowd disperses after a magistrate's ruling on a land dispute. The air is heavy with the weight of Dike justice and the shadow of Nemesis. The goddess of retribution lingers as a reminder that no wrong goes unpunished. In the classical Greek poleis, these small-scale legal battles over debts, boundaries, or slights were more than personal quarrels. They were the threads holding the community together. The resolution of these disputes, guided by moral codes and divine oversight, reveals how fragile yet resilient these city-states were, and how their struggles echo in modern notions of justice. The polis resolved disputes through a blend of formal rulings and communal pressure. As a citizen, you'd witness the magistrate impose a fine, perhaps 20 drachmas, or order restitution, like returning a misappropriated goat. In smaller poleis, unlike Athens' jury courts, outcomes often depended on reputation and witnesses. A man known for piety, who regularly offered wine to Zeus at the agora's altar, stood a better chance than a known cheat. Surviving laws, like those inscribed at Gortin, show penalties aimed at restoring balance. A debtor might work off a loan by harvesting his creditor's olives. Severe cases, like theft or assault, could lead to public shaming or temporary banishment, reinforcing the moral code that valued community over individual gain. Nemesis's influence was felt in these outcomes. Myths warned that hubris or dishonesty invited divine punishment, from barren fields to family curses. Yet, justice was imperfect. Wealth and status tipped the scales, as richer citizens could offer magistrates gifts or rally influential allies. You'd hear grumbling in the agora about biased rulings, echoing Hesiod's complaints from a century earlier. Social hierarchies further complicated fairness. Metics and slaves, despite their economic roles, were voiceless in court, their fates tied to citizen patrons. Women, represented by male kin, rarely saw direct justice, their disputes buried in family negotiations. Still, the polis relied on public accountability. A citizen who ignored a ruling risked ostracism, not Athens' formal exile, but a social cold shoulder, cutting him off from festivals or trade. Gossip as much as law enforced Dike, with neighbors shunning those who defied the communal ethos. The outcome of these disputes strengthened the polis's resilience. By settling quarrels publicly, communities like Thebes or Corinth maintained trust, allowing them to thrive despite external threats like Persian invasions or internal rivalries. These moral codes, rooted in respect for gods and neighbors, influenced later Greek thought, from Aristotle's ethics to Athens' democratic reforms. But the system's false corruption, exclusion foreshadowed challenges as poleis grew more complex, with trade and warfare straining traditional justice. Reflecting on this, Nemesis's quiet reckoning feels timeless. Modern legal systems, with their courts and contracts, still grapple with balancing fairness and power. much like the agora's magistrates. The poleis teaches us that justice is a communal act, reliant on shared values but vulnerable to human flaws. As you leave the agora, the question persists: how do we, today, ensure fairness when wealth, status, or ambition threaten the delicate equilibrium Nemesis once guarded? Forgotten realms of Atlantis, Plato's dialogues, and the memory of Minoan Crete yourself seated in the quiet halls of ancient Athens, where the air carries the faint scent of olive oil lamps and the distant murmur of the agora below. It is here, in the 4th century BCE, that Plato, the philosopher whose thoughts have echoed through millennia, commits to papyrus a tale that has puzzled and intrigued generations, the story of Atlantis. But as you settle into this narrative, know that we are not chasing myths of grandeur or sunken treasures. Instead, we delve into the mundane threads of historical memory, the everyday realities that Plato wove into his dialogues, and how they might reflect the faded echoes of Minoan Crete's civilization, whose routines of trade, administration, and survival quietly shaped the Bronze Age Mediterranean. Plato introduces Atlantis in his works Timaeus and Critias, composed around 360 BCE. These are not mere fables but philosophical tools, designed to illustrate ideals of governance and human hubris. In Timaeus, the story unfolds through Critias, who recounts a legend passed down from Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, who allegedly heard it from Egyptian priests and sages during his travels around 590 BCE. The priests describe Atlantis as a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, boasting advanced agriculture, intricate canal systems, and a society organized with meticulous precision. Its people, they say, cultivated fertile plains, harvested crops in abundance, and maintained a navy of 1,100 ships, all under a confederation of kings who met every 5 or 6 years to deliberate laws and sacrifices. Yet, as you picture this, consider the boring undercurrents, the daily labors that sustained such a realm. Farmers toiling under the sun to irrigate fields with redirected mountain streams, scribes tallying grain yields on clay tablets, and artisans forging bronze tools. In smoky workshops, Plato details the island's layout with almost architectural tedium, a central hill encircled by alternating rings of land and water, connected by bridges and tunnels for efficient navigation. The capital's walls were clad in orichalcum, a reddish metal perhaps akin to brass, not for spectacle but for practical durability against the elements. Temples dedicated to Poseidon housed golden statues, but their true function lay in ritual calendars that dictated planting seasons and communal feasts, ensuring societal harmony amid the rhythms of harvest and flood. Historians today suspect that Plato's Atlantis draws from real memories of Minoan Crete, distorted through oral traditions and cultural exchanges. Crete, the largest Greek island, hosted the Minoan civilization from roughly 3000 to 1450 BCE, a period marked not by conquests but by sophisticated palace economies. At Knossos, the sprawling complex often dubbed a palace, you would find not a king's fortress but a hub of administration. Frescoes depict not warriors in battle but processions of youths carrying libations, hinting at rituals tied to fertility and trade. The Minoans excelled in maritime commerce, exporting olive oil, wine, and pottery across the Aegean. Their ships, simple wooden vessels with square sails, braving seasonal winds to reach Egypt and the Levant. Daily life revolved around storage. Jars filled with grains, overseen by bureaucrats using linear, a script to record inventories. A script still undeciphered, preserving the tedium of accounting in eternal silence. The link to Atlantis strengthens when you examine the cataclysm. Plato describes a devastating earthquake and flood that swallowed the island in a single day and night. This mirrors the eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, a volcanic event that unleashed tsunamis and ash clouds, crippling Minoan ports and agriculture. Ash layers buried fields, forcing survivors to adapt by rebuilding irrigation ditches and reallocating labor to clear debris. In Crete, evidence from sites like Akrotiri shows homes with underfloor plumbing and multi-story buildings, their walls painted with serene seascapes, everyday scenes of fishermen hauling nets, and women grinding flour, these were not the opulent fantasies of legend, but practical innovations for a society dependent on predictable sea routes and seasonal rains. Plato's purpose, however, was philosophical rather than historical reportage. He uses Atlantis to contrast with an idealized ancient Athens where citizens lived modestly, farming small plots and serving in citizen militias without the excesses of empire. The Atlantans' downfall stems from their drift from virtue there, routines corrupted by greed over exploiting mines for metals, overextending trade networks until collapse. In this, you sense Plato's critique of contemporary Athens ravaged by the Peloponnesian War, where daily debates in the assembly had devolved into factional squabbles over grain supplies, and alliances dot as you reflect on these dialogues, scribbled in the dim light of Plato's academy where students discussed ethics amid olive groves. One wonders if Atlantis was indeed a veiled memory of Minoan Crete. What forgotten details of their daily resilience did Plato omit, and how might uncovering them reshape our understanding of lost civilizations? As you linger in the shadow of Plato's words, imagine yourself walking the stone paths of ancient Crete, where the air hums with the rhythm of daily life in the Minoan world. The connection between Plato's Atlantis and this Bronze Age civilization deepens when you consider the uncelebrated routines that sustained its people, routines that, while mundane, were the backbone of a society that may have inspired the philosopher's tale. In this section, let us immerse you in the ordinary yet intricate details of Minoan Crete, from the labor of its farmers to the bureaucracy of its palaces, and explore how these echoes of survival and adaptation resonate in Plato's dialogues. The unresolved question of Atlantis's true nature looms. How much of this lost world was real, and how much was Plato's invention to serve his philosophical ends? Picture the landscape of Crete around 1000 BCE, where terraced hillsides bloom, with olive groves and vineyards, tended by farmers who rose before dawn to check soil moisture and prune vines. These were not the heroic figures of myth, but families whose survival hinged on the predictable cycles of planting and harvest. Archaeological evidence from sites like Knossos and Phaistos reveals storage magazines filled with pithoi massive, clay jars holding oil, wine, and barley. Scribes, likely trained from youth, sat cross-legged in shaded courtyards, etching linear A inscriptions on damp clay to track these resources. Each tablet, no larger than a hand, recorded the minutiae of daily life, 20 measures of wheat to the western granary or 10 amphorae of oil, for trade with Rhodes. These records, though dull to the modern eye, ensured food security through Crete's dry summers, when streams dwindled and crops relied on intricate irrigation channels carved into the earth. The palaces, often misnamed for their grandeur, were less royal residences and more administrative hubs. At Knossos, you would see a sprawling complex of over 1,000 rooms, not adorned with gold but with practical gypsum benches and drainage pipes. Here, overseers coordinated labor potters shaping vessels for export, weavers dyeing wool with murex purple, and shipwrights repairing hulls battered by Aegean storms. The frescoes, so often romanticized, depict not kings but communal rituals, men and women in rhythmic processions, offering grain or wine to deities tied to fertility. These ceremonies, held in open courtyards under the Mediterranean sun, were as routine as market days, reinforcing social cohesion through shared meals and prayers. Women, evidence suggests, held significant roles, managing storage and possibly leading rituals, their daily tasks shaping the economic and spiritual pulse of the community. Plato's Atlantis mirrors this in its description of a society obsessed with order, canals dug with geometric precision, temples hosting regular sacrifices, and a bureaucracy that allocated resources across a vast island. Yet, where Plato speaks of Atlantis's navy and monumental architecture, Crete's reality was humbler. Its ships, built from local cedar, carried modest crews of 20 to 30 rowers, navigating trade routes to Cyprus and Egypt by following seasonal winds and star patterns. These voyages, fraught with the tedium of checking sails and bailing water, were the lifeblood of Minoan prosperity, exchanging pottery for Egyptian linen or Anatolian tin. The eruption of Thera, however, disrupted this delicate balance, ash blanketed fields, forcing farmers to abandon coastal plots and relocate inland, while tsunamis wrecked ports, leaving dockworkers to salvage waterlogged timber. Excavations at Akrotiri reveal homes buried mid-use bread ovens still warm, looms threaded with unfinished cloth testifying to a society halted in its daily tracks. Plato, writing centuries later, likely drew on these fragmented tales, perhaps filtered through Egyptian records or Greek oral traditions. His Atlantis exaggerates Crete's scale, describing an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. Yet the emphasis on canals and agriculture feels grounded in Minoan ingenuity. The philosophers focus on Atlantis's moral decline. Its people corrupted by wealth parallels Crete's post-eruption struggles, where strained resources may have sparked social tensions. In Critias, Plato details the Atlantans' elaborate laws inscribed on a pillar in their temple, and nod perhaps to the Minoan practice of record-keeping, though no such pillar survives in Crete's ruins. As you envision these parallels, consider the lives left unrecorded, the fisherwoman mending nets at dawn, the potter shaping clay by lamplight, or the child learning to tally grain. These were the threads of resilience that held Crete together. Even as catastrophe loomed, Plato's Atlantis ends in divine punishment. But what real-world pressures, environmental, social, or economic, brought the Minoans to their knees? And how did their daily adaptations shape the myths that reached Athens centuries later? As you stand on the windswept shores of Crete, where the Aegean whispers against rocky cliffs, you can almost hear the faint echoes of Minoan life fading into history. The cataclysm that reshaped this world, likely the eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE, marks the climax of our tale. Not with the dramatic flourish of a sunken empire, but with the slow, grinding resilience of a people adapting to loss. In this final section, we unravel the aftermath of Minoan Crete's decline, tracing how its daily routines of survival and recovery informed Plato's Atlantis, and reflect on how this forgotten civilization's legacy ripples into our modern understanding of human endurance. The question lingers: what lessons does this quiet collapse hold for us today? The eruption of Thera was no single day of wrath, as Plato's Atlantis suggests, but a series of blows that unraveled Minoan society. Over decades, ash from the volcano-blanketed fields, rendering soil infertile for years, farmers, once reliant on predictable harvests, turned to foraging wild herbs and fishing to supplement dwindling stores. Excavations at Knossos reveal smaller storage jars in later layers, hinting at rationing as grain supplies shrank. Tsunamis ravaged coastal settlements, leaving dockworkers to rebuild harbors with salvaged stone, while inland communities dug new wells to replace contaminated springs. These were not heroic feats, but the tedious labor of survival families hauling water, artisans repairing cracked pottery, and elders teaching children to weave nets with frayed rope. The Minoans' famed bureaucracy adapted, too, with linear tablets showing reduced trade volumes as ships struggled to navigate debris-choked routes to Egypt and the Levant. By 1450 BCE, the Mycenaeans, a mainland Greek culture, began asserting control over Crete, likely exploiting its weakened state. Knossos' palace, once a hub of commerce, became a Mycenaean administrative center, its frescoes plastered over with simpler designs. The transition was not violent conquest but a gradual shift, local scribes learning Linear B, a script adapted from Linear A, to record taxes in a new language. Daily life persisted, but with less vibrancy. Potters produced plainer vessels, and religious rituals, once elaborate, grew austere, focusing on offerings of oil rather than grand feasts. The Minoans' maritime dominance faded as Mycenaean ships took over trade routes, their crews mastering the same star-guided navigation once honed by Cretan sailors. Yet, traces of Minoan culture endured in stories, tales of a prosperous island, perhaps carried by refugees to Egypt, where priests later shared them with Solon, Plato's ancestor. Plato's Atlantis, with its moral tale of hubris and divine punishment, likely draws from these fragmented memories, exaggerated to serve his philosophical aims. In Critias, the Atlantans' fall stems from overreaching ambition, a cautionary parallel to Athens' own struggles after the Peloponnesian War, when depleted grain reserves and fractured alliances left the city humbled. Plato's focus on Atlantis' intricate canals and vast fields echoes Minoan innovations, but his narrative strips away the human cost: the laborers who dredged those channels, the farmers who replanted barren fields. By framing Atlantis as a lost utopia, he immortalizes Crete's achievements while obscuring the resilience of its ordinary people, whose daily toil rebuilt communities amid ruin. Reflecting on this, you might see parallels in our modern world, where societies face environmental and economic disruptions. The Minoan story is not one of grand battles, but of quiet adaptation, reallocating resources, rethinking trade, and preserving knowledge through clay tablets and oral tales. Their collapse reminds us that civilizations are not defined by their monuments but by the persistence of their people. From the potter shaping clay to the sailor charting the stars, Crete's legacy, filtered through Plato's dialogues, challenges us to ask, how do our own daily routines, so easily overlooked, shape the stories that future generations will tell about us? The labyrinth's design, architectural realities of Knossos, and daily palace administration. Picture yourself standing on a sunlit hill in Crete, around 1900 BCE, where the air smells of wild thyme and the distant sea glints under a clear Mediterranean sky. Before you sprawls the complex of Knossos, often called a palace but more akin to a bustling administrative hub of the Minoan civilization. This is not the mythical labyrinth of Daedalus, with its monstrous minotaur, but a real place where architects, laborers, and scribes shaped daily life through meticulous planning and routine tasks. As you step into this world, we'll uncover the boring yet significant details of Knossos' construction and administration, how its walls, storerooms, and drainage systems supported a society dependent on order and resource management. This is a story of human ingenuity, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet precision of everyday work. Knossos, first excavated by Arthur Evans in 1900 CE, was the heart of Minoan Crete, active from roughly 3000 to 1450 BCE, covering about 20,000 square meters. It housed perhaps 1,000 rooms connected by winding corridors and open courtyards. Unlike the fortresses of later Greek cities, Knossos was unfortified. Its walls built not for defense, but to organize space. Imagine masons hauling limestone blocks, quarried from nearby hills, their hands calloused from shaping stones with bronze chisels. These walls, often painted with ochre or whitewashed, stood to stories high, supported by cedar beams that carpenters trimmed with adzes in dusty workshops. The design prioritized function. Rooms clustered around central courts to maximize airflow. In Crete's hot summers, while narrow staircases saved space for storage, the palace's true marvel lay in its infrastructure. Picture workers digging clay-lined channels for drainage, ensuring rainwater flowed to cisterns rather than flooding storerooms. Excavations reveal pipes under floors, carrying water to communal basins where women washed laundry or soaked wool. For dyeing, these systems, maintained by laborers who cleared sediment weekly, reflect a society obsessed with cleanliness and efficiency. Storerooms, lined with massive pithoi clay jars as tall as a person, held olive oil, wine, and barley. Scribes, seated on gypsum benches, recorded inventories in Linear A, a script of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets. A typical entry might note 50 jars of oil to Phaistos, or 30 measures of wheat for the festival. Each tablet, dried in the sun to preserve the day's work. Daily life at Knossos revolved around these routines. Artisans in small workshops crafted pottery, their wheels spinning as they shaped vessels for trade with Egypt or Cyprus. Women wove textiles, using looms weighted with clay discs, producing cloth dyed with saffron or murex purple for export. Overseers, likely chosen for literacy, coordinated labor, ensuring potters had clay and farmers delivered grain on schedule. Religious rituals, tied to fertility and harvest, punctuated the calendar. Frescoes show processions of youths carrying Rhyton's conical vessels for libations, performed in courtyards where priests burned herbs to honor deities. These ceremonies, far from mystical, were as routine as market days, reinforcing social bonds through shared meals of bread and lentils. Yet, Knossos was not immune to challenges, earthquakes. Common in Crete, cracked walls forcing builders to reinforce them with wooden frames, a technique still visible in archaeological remains. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE buried nearby fields in ash, disrupting food supplies. Administrators responded by reallocating labor, sending workers to clear debris or dig new irrigation ditches. These efforts, documented in sparse tablets, show a society adapting through tedious pragmatism. Not heroic feats dot as you wander Knossos' corridors. Envisioning scribes tallying jars and masons patching walls, one question emerges: how did this intricate web of daily tasks sustain a civilization for centuries? And what pressures eventually strained it to the breaking point? As you wander deeper into the maze-like corridors of Knossos, the hum of Minoan life surrounds you, potters shaping clay, overseers barking orders, and the faint clink of bronze tools against stone. It is around 1800 BCE, and this sprawling complex, often mistaken for a royal palace, thrives as the administrative and economic heart of Crete. In this section, we peel back the layers of daily operations, revealing the intricate web of labor, trade, and ritual that kept Knossos running. Far from the mythical labyrinth of legend, this was a place of relentless organization, where every jar of oil and every repaired wall reflected a society's resilience. Yet, as you delve into these routines, a question looms: how did the Minoans balance this meticulous order with the chaos of natural disasters and external pressures? Imagine the central courtyard at dawn, where workers gather under the watchful eyes of administrators. These overseers, likely men and women trained in lineae, managed Knossos' economy with a precision that rivals modern bureaucracy. Their days were spent cross-referencing clay tablets, ensuring that shipments of barley reached Phaistos while that pottery bound for Egypt was loaded onto ships at Amnisos, Knossos' nearby port. Excavations reveal hundreds of these tablets, listing mundane details: 40 measures of wheat to the eastern storehouse, or 12 workers assigned to canal maintenance. Each entry, etched with a reed stylus, was a cog in the machine of Minoan prosperity, ensuring food and goods flowed smoothly across Crete and beyond. Scribes worked in small rooms, their fingers stained with clay, while runners carried tablets to storerooms where laborers stacked pithoi filled with surplus grain or wine. The architecture itself was a testament to practical ingenuity. Picture builders reinforcing walls with wooden beams to withstand Crete's frequent earthquakes, a technique archaeologists call timber framing. When tremors cracked plaster, workers mixed lime and sand to patch it, their labor guided by foremen, who measured angles with simple plumb lines. The drainage system, a marvel of engineering, required constant upkeep, laborers shoveling silt from channels to prevent flooding during winter rains. These tasks, repetitive and unglamorous, were critical to Knossos' survival. Courtyards, designed for ventilation, doubled as workspaces where women carded wool or ground flour, their chatter mingling with the scent of baking bread from nearby ovens. Frescoes, like the famous bull leaping scene, adorned walls not for art's sake but to mark spaces for ritual, where offerings of oil or honey reinforced communal ties. Trade was Knossos' lifeblood, tying daily routines to distant lands. At the port, sailors loaded ships with olive oil and pottery, navigating to Cyprus or the Levant using seasonal winds and star charts. Each voyage required meticulous planning, checking hulls for leaks, rationing dried figs for crews, and bartering for tin or linen upon arrival. Back at Knossos, artisans worked in rhythm, potters firing clay in kilns, jewelers carving seals. From carnelian, women, often central to these processes, dyed textiles with murex, a process so labor-intensive it took thousands of shells for a single garment. These goods, tracked by scribes, fueled Crete's wealth, but the eruption of Thera, around 1600 BC, disrupted this cycle. Ash smothered fields, forcing farmers to abandon coastal plots and plant barley inland, while tsunamis damaged docks, leaving sailors to salvage waterlogged cargo. Knossos' response was methodical, administrators redirected labor, sending workers to rebuild irrigation channels or clear ash from fields. Tablets show increased offerings to deities, perhaps to appease gods blamed for the disaster. Yet, the strain was palpable. Fewer goods flowed, and storage jars held less. As you envision these workers toiling under pressure, maintaining Knossos' order amid creeping decline, one wonders, what internal and external forces began to unravel this carefully woven system? And how did the Minoans adapt to a world shifting beneath their feet? As you stand in the fading light of Knossos, around 1500 BCE, the once vibrant complex feels quieter, its corridors less crowded, its storerooms emptier. The Minoan civilization, strained by the eruption of Thera and mounting pressures, faces a slow decline, not with a dramatic collapse, but through the gradual unraveling of its meticulous systems. In this final section, we trace the climax of Knossos' story, its adaptation to crisis, its eventual absorption by Mycenaean newcomers, and the enduring legacy of its daily routines. This is not a tale of heroes or monsters, but of ordinary people whose resilience shaped a civilization's twilight. As you reflect on their efforts, consider, what does Knossos' quiet fall reveal about the fragility and strength of human systems? The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE was a turning point. Its ash clouds smothered Crete's fields, slashing harvests while tsunamis wrecked coastal ports. Farmers, once tending olive groves, now scraped ash from soil, planting barley in less fertile inland plots. Laborers worked tirelessly, digging new irrigation channels to capture sparse rainwater, their hands blistered from wooden shovels. At Knossos, scribes recorded dwindling supplies. Tablets show smaller allocations of oil and grain, with entries like 10 jars to Molia instead of the usual 50. The palace's drainage systems, clogged with debris, demanded constant maintenance. Workers hauled silt under overseers' watchful eyes, ensuring water still reached cisterns. These tasks, repetitive and grueling, kept Knossos functional, but the strain showed in reduced trade and fewer ritual feasts, as evidenced by smaller offerings in shrines. By 1450 BCE, Mycenaeans from mainland Greece began to dominate Crete, likely exploiting its weakened state. Knossos did not fall to siege, but transitioned quietly. Mycenaean administrators adopted the palace, replacing Linear A with Linear B, a script suited to their Greek dialect. Scribes, perhaps Minoans retrained, now recorded taxes in a new language, noting 100 sheep for poleis or 20 bronze ingots for storage. The frescoes, once vivid with processions, were whitewashed or replaced with martial motifs, reflecting a shift from ritual to governance. Yet, Minoan traditions persisted. Potters continued crafting, stirrup jars and women wove textiles, though. For Mycenaean markets, the port at Knossos saw fewer ships, as trade routes shifted to Mycenaean hubs like Tiryns. But sailors still navigated using Minoan star charts, a testament to enduring knowledge. The palace itself, though still standing, bore scars. Earthquakes frequenting Crete, cracked walls, and repairs grew. Patchwork limestone replaced with rougher stone, timber framing less precise. Religious life simplified instead of grand libations. Priests offered modest oil or herbs, as shown in sparse votive deposits. The bureaucracy, once Knossos' strength, became a burden as resources shrank. Tablets hint at labor reallocations. Workers sent to rebuild distant farms, rather than maintain the palace. This slow decline, not a sudden catastrophe, marked Knossos' end as a Minoan center. By 1300 BCE, its rooms abandoned or repurposed, its corridors silent. Reflecting on Knossos, you see a society sustained by its daily rhythms. Scribes tallying jars, masons patching walls, sailors braving the Aegean. Its fall teaches us that civilizations endure not through monuments, but through the persistence of ordinary tasks. Today, as we face our own disruptions, climate shifts, or economic strains, Knossos reminds us of the power of adaptation, the value of systems built on cooperation, and the fragility of even the most ordered societies. What lessons can we draw from these ancient workers whose quiet labor kept a civilization alive until its final days? Odysseus' wanderings, trade routes, and survival strategies of Bronze Age sailors. Imagine yourself aboard a creaking wooden ship, its square sail catching the Aegean breeze. As you navigate the wine-dark sea around 1400 BCE, you are a Bronze Age sailor, not the mythical Odysseus of Homer's epic, but one of the countless mariners whose daily labors sustained the trade networks of the Minoan and Mycenaean worlds. This is no tale of cyclops or sirens, but of the mundane realities navigation, cargo management, and survival that defined life on the open water. As you grip the oar, the horizon stretches endlessly, dotted with islands that were both refuge and risk. Let us explore the forgotten routines of these sailors, whose resilience fueled the Mediterranean's economic pulse, and uncover how their world shaped the legends later immortalized by poets. In the Bronze Age, the Aegean Sea was a bustling highway of trade, linking Crete, the Greek mainland, Cyprus, and the Levant. Ships, often no longer than 20 meters, were built from cedar or pine, their planks lashed together with rope and sealed with pitch to withstand waves. Picture yourself as part of a crew of 20 to 30, hauling oars under a scorching sun, your hands rough from hemp ropes. Navigation relied on practical knowledge, not maps. Sailors memorized star patterns, like the rising of Arcturus, to guide nighttime voyages, and watched for coastal landmarks like Crete's Mount Ida. Days were spent scanning the horizon for squalls, while nights meant anchoring near rocky shores, cooking barley porridge over small fires kindled with flint. Cargo was the heart of your journey. Minoan ships carried olive oil in clay amphorae, stacked carefully in the hold to balance the vessel. Mycenaean traders added stirrup jars of wine and bronze tools, bartered for Egyptian linen or Anatolian tin. At ports like Ugarit or Byblos, you'd haggle with merchants, exchanging pottery for grain or rare lapis lazuli, all while tallying goods on clay tablets in Linear B. These records, found in Mycenaean archives, list mundane details: 30 jars of oil to Cyprus or 10 hides for roads. Loading the ship was tedious, each jar wrapped in straw to prevent cracks, each rope checked for fraying. Storms could ruin weeks of work, forcing you to bail water with wooden buckets, or jettison cargo to stay afloat. Survival demanded ingenuity. You carried dried figs, olives, and hard bread rationed to last weeks, supplemented by fishing with nets woven from flax. Fresh water, stored in goatskin bags, was precious. A leak meant drinking seawater or praying for rain. Coastal communities offered respite. Villagers traded fish for pottery, their huts built from mud brick near sandy coves. But danger lurked. Pirates, often rival traders, could ambush near narrow straits, forcing you to wield a bronze dagger or rely on speed. Shipwrecks, like the Uluburan wreck off Turkey Sea, 1300 BCE, reveal lost cargoes, copper ingots, amber beads, even a gold scarab, testifying to the risks of these voyages. The myths of Odysseus, codified centuries later in Homer's Odyssey, c. 8th century BCE, likely drew from these sailors' tales, passed down through generations. His wanderings reflect real roots: Crete to Egypt, Sicily to the Levant, where storms and hostile locals were all too familiar. Yet, the daily grind of checking sails, repairing hulls, and bartering under foreign skies was the true epic, uncelebrated, but vital. As you row toward the next port, salt stinging your skin, one question lingers. What challenges tested these sailors' endurance? And how did their quiet resilience shape the trade networks that bound the Bronze Age world? As you row beneath the blazing Aegean sun, the creak of your ship's timbers blends with the rhythmic splash of oars, a reminder of the grueling routine that defines life as a Bronze Age sailor. Around 1400 BCE, the trade routes you navigate stretching from Crete to Cyprus, Egypt, and the Levant are the arteries of Minoan and Mycenaean prosperity. But they demand relentless vigilance and adaptation. In this section, we delve deeper into the daily challenges of these voyages, from maintaining fragile vessels to bartering in foreign ports, and explore how sailors' survival strategies sustained the Mediterranean's economic web. Yet, as you scan the horizon for the next island, a question tugs at you. What unseen pressures tested these mariners' endurance? And how did their persistence shape the myths that inspired Odysseus's tale? Each journey began with meticulous preparation, Picture yourself at the port of Onisos near Knossos, where your crew loads amphorae of olive oil, each sealed with clay stoppers to prevent leaks. Shipwrights, their hands stained with pitch, inspect the hull for cracks, patching them with resin-soaked linen. The ship, a shallow draft vessel with a single square sail, relies on oars for maneuverability in tight harbors. You check ropes for wear, knowing a freight line could snap in a storm, and stow provisions, dried fish, olives, and barley cakes in woven baskets. Navigation is an art of memory. You track the sun's arc, the flight paths of seabirds, and landmarks like the cliffs of Melos. At night, you steer by constellations, the Pleiades guiding you towards Cyprus. A single miscalculation could strand you on rocky shoals, as evidenced by wrecks like Cape Gelidonia, where copper ingots and broken pottery littered the seabed. Trade itself was a delicate dance. In Ugarit's bustling port, you barter with Canaanite merchants, offering Minoan pottery for tin or ivory. Language barriers force reliance on gestures and tallies scratched on clay, with scribes noting 20 jars for 5 talents of copper. These exchanges, recorded in Linear archives, required patience, hours spent weighing goods on stone balances or inspecting linen for flaws. Coastal villages, like those on Rhodes, offered rest but demanded tribute. You trade a bronze dagger for fish and water, shared over fires with locals who speak unfamiliar tongues. Women in these ports often managed trade, their authority evident in seals stamped with goddesses, hinting at matrilineal customs that shaped commerce. Survival at sea tested every sailor's wits. Storms could arise without warning, forcing you to lower the sail and row against towering waves, your arms aching as you bail water with wooden scoops. Food spoiled quickly. Moldy bread meant netting fish or scavenging seaweed. Pirates were a constant threat. Fast boats from rival islands could strike near the Cyclades, their crews armed with slings and spears. You carry a bronze sword, but flight is often wiser than fight. The Uluburan wreck, dated to 1300 BCE, reveals a lost cargo of myrrh, glass beads, and ebony, suggesting a single ambush or storm could ruin a season's work. To cope, sailors shared tales of survival, stories of outwitting raiders or finding hidden coves passed down. In ports, perhaps seeding the Odyssey's tales of cunning. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BC disrupted these routes, burying ports in ash and triggering tsunamis that wrecked ships. Sailors adapted, rerouting to safer harbors like Pylos, while traders shifted to inland markets, bartering with farmers for grain. These adjustments, unheroic but vital, kept trade alive. As you steer toward the next port, salt crusting your skin, you wonder, how did these sailors' daily struggles against nature and rivals lay the foundation for the myths of wandering heroes? And what broke the delicate balance of their world? As you guide your ship into the twilight of the Bronze Age around 1300 BCE, the Aegean feels less forgiving, its winds sharper, its ports quieter. The trade networks that once bound Crete, Mycenaean, and distant lands are fraying, strained by environmental upheaval and rising competition. This is the climax of the sailor's story, not a single cataclysm, but a slow erosion of the systems that sustained their voyages. In this final section, we trace the decline of these maritime routes, the adaptations that prolonged their survival, and the enduring legacy of these mariners' resilience. As you anchor in a cove, the stars dimmed by clouds, consider, how did these sailors' daily struggles shape the myths of wandering heroes like Odysseus? And what lessons do their quiet endurance offer us today? The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE cast a long shadow. Its tsunamis wrecked ports like Amnisos, leaving docks littered with shattered amphorae, ash-buried fields, forcing coastal farmers to abandon olive groves for inland barley plots, reducing the oil and wine available. For trade, you, a sailor, now carry fewer jars, each voyage yielding slimmer profits. Linear tablets from Pylos showed dwindling cargo lists, 10 jars to Ugarit, instead of 30, reflecting strained supplies. To cope, you reroute to safer harbors like Terins, where Mycenaean lords demand tribute in bronze. Navigation grows harder, silted channels, clogged by ferrous debris, force you to memorize new coastal landmarks. Like the low hills of Naxos, ship maintenance intensifies patching hulls with scarce timber, reusing frayed ropes and rationing pitch for waterproofing. Piracy surged as trade faltered. Rival crews, desperate for goods, ambushed ships in straits like the Dardanelles. Wielding slings and stolen Mycenaean swords, you learn to sail at night, hiding in coves, your crew whispering tales of lost ships to keep morale. The Uluburan wreck, dated to 1300 BCE, tells of such loss as its cargo of copper, ivory, and amber sank off Turkey, likely to pirates or storms. Survival meant ingenuity. You fish with repaired nets, boil seawater for salt to preserve food and barter broken pottery for grain in remote villages. Women in these ports, often traders themselves, exchange fish for your remaining oil. Their seals stamped with Minoan motifs, a fading echo of Crete's influence. By 1200 BCE, Mycenaean dominance reshaped the Aegean. Knossos, now a Mycenaean hub, sent fewer ships, its scribes recording taxes in linear B for mainland palaces. You adapt, carrying Mycenaean stirrup jars instead of Minoan amphorae, trading with new powers like the Hittites. But the networks collapse. Archaeological evidence shows abandoned ports and fewer foreign goods in Greece. The sea peoples, mysterious raiders mentioned in Egyptian texts, may have been displaced sailors like you, driven to piracy as trade routes failed. Climate shifts, suggested by pollen records, brought droughts, starving coastal communities, and forcing you to row longer routes for meager hauls. Homer's Odyssey, composed centuries later, wove these struggles into myth. Odysseus's cunning outwitting foes, navigating storms mirrors the real sailors' tactics, their stories told in tavern firesides. Their legacy lies not in gold but in resilience, the sailor who mended sails, the merchant who bartered under threat, the navigator who read the stars. Today, as global trade faces disruptions, climate change, supply chain strains, these mariners remind us that survival hinges on adaptability, cooperation, and a quiet persistence of daily work. What can we learn from these uncelebrated voyages, whose forgotten journeys laid the foundation for epic tales and the interconnected world? We navigate now the Trojan horse, siege tactics, and the tedious logistics of ancient warfare. Imagine yourself crouched in the dust of the Trojan plain around 1250 BCE, where the air smells of sweat and sun-baked earth, and the distant walls of Troy loom under a hazy sky. You are not a hero like Achilles, but an ordinary laborer or soldier in the Mycenaean army, part of a decade-long siege that will inspire Homer's Iliad. This is no tale of divine wrath or epic duels, but of the grinding logistics supply chains, camp maintenance and siege tactics that defined the Trojan War. As you haul timber or sharpen bronze spears, we'll explore the mundane realities of ancient warfare, where survival hinged on relentless planning and toil. How did these daily efforts sustain a siege? And what hidden strains set the stage for the legendary Trojan horse? The Trojan War, if historical, likely occurred in the late Bronze Age, targeting Troy, modern Thessaloniki, Turkey, a fortified city. Controlling trade routes through the Dardanelles, Mycenaean Greeks, unified under leaders like Agamemnon, sought to capture its wealth, grain, horses, and access to Black Sea trade. Picture a sprawling camp of 50,000 men based on estimates from Homer's catalogue of ships stretching along the coast. Your days are spent building shelters from driftwood and reeds, cooking lentils over dung fires, and fetching water from the Scamander River. The camp buzzes with activity. Blacksmiths hammer bronze into spearheads, fetchers carve arrows from ashwood, and scribes tally rations on clay tablets in linear B, noting 100 measures of barley for the Argives. Siege warfare was less about battles and more about endurance. Troy's walls, 5 meters thick and 8 meters high, excavated at Thessaloniki, were nearly impregnable. Built of limestone and reinforced with towers, you join work crews digging trenches to block Trojan sorties, piling earth with wooden shovels. Archers, stationed on makeshift platforms, fire arrows tipped with flint to deter defenders, while others maintain battering rams, logs bound with rope, rarely used due to the walls. Strength, Food supplies are critical. Ships from Mycenaean ports like Pylos deliver wheat and dried fish. But storms or pirate raids, common in the Aegean, delay shipments. You ration bread, supplementing it with foraged herbs or slaughtered goats, while quartermasters haggle with local farmers for grain, trading bronze tools for sacks of barley. Daily life is grueling. You repair armor leather tunics sewn with bronze plates under the shade of canvas tents. Disease spreads in the crowded camp. Archaeologists note mass graves near Troy with signs of malnutrition and infection. Healers boil herbs like thyme to treat wounds, but many succumb to fever. Morale wanes after years of stalemate. You hear whisper tales of home, of fields left unplowed in Mycenae. Leaders organize festivals to boost spirits, offering wine and roasted meat under starlit skies, but these are rare. The siege's success hinges on logistics. Carpenters build ladders for failed assaults, while scouts, creeping through olive groves, report Trojan movements. The Trojan horse, a later legend, may reflect real siege tactics, deception, or engineering born from desperation. Was it a wooden structure, a metaphor for a breach, or a forgotten device? As you labor under Troy's shadow, hauling logs for yet another siege tower, one question persists. How did the Mycenaeans' relentless logistics and ingenuity overcome Troy's defenses, and what toll did this protracted siege exact on both sides? As you toil in the Mycenaean camp outside Troy's towering walls, around 1250 BCE, the siege stretches into its later years, and the air grows heavy with dust and despair. The plain hums with the relentless rhythm of survival axes chopping wood, the clatter of bronze armor, and the low murmur of hungry men. You are an ordinary laborer or soldier, caught in the grind of maintaining a war machine that depends on intricate logistics and unyielding patience. In this section, we delve deeper into the daily operations that sustained the siege, from fortifying the camp to managing scarce resources, and explore how these efforts tested the Mycenaeans' resolve. Yet, as you stack firewood under a darkening sky, a question gnaws at you. What desperate measures pushed the Greeks toward the cunning plan of the Trojan horse, and how did the Trojans endure behind their walls? The camp, sprawling along the Trojan coast, is a city of its own, with shelters of reeds and hides housing thousands. Your mornings begin hauling water from the Scamander River, a task slowed by muddied streams after rains. Cooks prepare barley, porridge over fires fueled by scarce timber, while quartermasters ration dwindling supplies. Linear tablets from Mycenaean archives record 50 measures of wheat for the Achaeans, half the previous year's quota. Ships from Pylos or Tones bring grain and dried fish, but storms delay deliveries, forcing you to forage wild greens or barter with local villagers for goats. These villagers, wary of the army, demand bronze daggers or pottery for their goods. Their haggling drawn out under olive trees. Siege tactics evolve with grinding precision. You join crews building earth ramps to support siege towers, wooden frames lashed with rope, dragged inch by inch toward Troy's walls. These towers, often abandoned after Trojan archers rain arrows, require constant repairs. Carpenters saw cedar planks, their hands blistered from adzes. Trenches, dug to trap Trojan cavalry, fill with debris, so you shovel earth alongside comrades. Sweat mixing with dust, scouts slipping through scrub at night. Report on Trojan defenses, gates reinforced with bronze, sentries pacing the ramparts. Inside Troy, archaeological evidence from Hesiod suggests a city under strain. Smaller storage jars indicate rationing, while charred bones hint at livestock slaughtered as grain ran low. Life in the camp is relentless. You mend armor leather tunics patched with linen or sharpened spears, their bronze tips dulled from skirmishes. Disease festers. Mass graves near Troy show skeletons with signs of dysentery, likely from tainted water. Healers crush garlic and myrtle for poultices, but burials are frequent, marked by simple stones. Morale sags as years pass. You hear tales of Mycenae's untended fields whispered during night watches. Leaders like Agamemnon hold councils in tents, debating whether to assault or starve Troy out, while priests burn thyme to appease gods. Their rituals as routine as meals. These efforts, documented in sparse Mycenaean records, show a war of attrition, not glory. Troy's defenders, meanwhile, adapt behind their walls. Excavations reveal rebuilt gates and water cisterns, suggesting preparations for a long siege. Trojan women likely wove cloth for trade with neutral neighbors, bartering for grain through small postern gates. The Trojan horse, a later legend, may symbolize a shift in Mycenaean strategy deception born from exhaustion. Was it a real structure, a battering ram disguised as an offering, or a tale of betrayal? As you labor, hauling logs for yet another failed tower, you wonder, what breaking point drove the Mycenaeans to such a ruse? And how did Troy's own daily struggles mirror the Greeks' entrance? As you stand in the Mycenaean camp, around 1200 BCE, the Trojan plain is scarred from years of siege, its fields trampled, its air thick with smoke from dwindling fires. The war, stretching toward a decade, nears its climax not in a blaze of heroic glory, but in a final act of cunning born from exhaustion. You, an ordinary laborer or soldier, feel the weight of relentless toil, from hauling dwindling supplies to repairing battered siege equipment. In this section, we unravel the fall of Troy, the role of the Trojan horse, and the aftermath for both sides, revealing how logistics and resilience shaped this pivotal moment. As you gaze at Troy's walls, now closer than ever, one question lingers. What legacy did this grueling siege leave? And how does it echo in our understanding of human endurance? The Mycenaean camp teeters on collapse. Supplies, once plentiful, are scarce. Linear B tablets from Pylos record 20 measures of barley for thousands, a fraction of earlier quotas. You ration stale bread, supplemented by foraged nettles, while ships from Mycenae arrive irregularly, battered by Aegean storms. Disease ravages the camp. Skeletal remains at Hesiod show signs of starvation and plague, forcing you to dig mass graves under moonlight. Yet the siege persists. Carpenters, their cedar stocks depleted, repurpose broken ladders into crude siege towers, while you drag stones to reinforce trenches against Trojan raids. Scouts report weakened defenses cracks. In Troy's gates, sentries thinned by hunger hinting at a city on the brink. Inside Troy, life mirrors your struggle. Excavations reveal cramped storerooms with tiny jars, suggesting severe rationing. Trojan women spin wool for trade through secret gates, bartering for grain with Anatolian allies. Cisterns, dug deep into bedrock, provide water, but charred animal bones indicate livestock slaughtered to stave off famine. The Trojan horse, described in Homer's Odyssey c. 8th century BCE, likely reflects a real tactic, perhaps a wooden siege engine, disguised as a votive offering to exploit Trojan religious customs, or a metaphor for betrayal by a turncoat. Archaeological layers at Troy Levelvere show fire and destruction around 1200 BCE, supporting a violent end, possibly after Greeks infiltrated through a weakened gate. The fall, when it comes, is swift but costly. Imagine hiding in a hollow structure or scaling walls under cover of night, your heart pounding as you torch granaries. Troy burns, its limestone walls blackened, its people fleeing or enslaved. Mycenaean victories Pyrrhic, returning ships carry tales of plunder, gold, horses, captives, but also disease and depleted resources. Linear B records from Mycenae fade after 1200 BCE, suggesting economic collapse, perhaps from overextending during the war. The Aegean trade network, strained by Thera's eruption and piracy, crumbles, leaving ports like Pylos abandoned. You, a survivor, return to untended fields, your labor in Troy a distant memory. Homer's Iliad immortalizes this siege, but its true story lies in the mundane, the soldier sharpening spears, the cook rationing grain, the Trojan weaver bartering for survival. This war of attrition, sustained by logistics, reveals human tenacity amid scarcity. Today, as we face prolonged conflicts or resource crises, Troy's lesson endures. Victory and defeat hinge on the quiet persistence of ordinary tasks. The Trojan horse, whether real or symbolic, reminds us that ingenuity often triumphs where force fails. What can we learn from these laborers, whose unnoticed efforts shaped epic tales and the fragile balance of ancient empires? Persephone's descent. harvest cycles, and the routine of Eleusinian rituals. Picture yourself walking through the golden fields of Eleusis, a small town west of Athens, around 1400 BCE. The air carries the scent of ripe barley and wild thyme, and the distant hum of chants signals a festival tied to the harvest. You are not a mythical figure like Persephone, but an ordinary farmer or priestess, part of a community whose daily rhythms revolve around the cycles of sowing, reaping, and ritual. This is not a tale of divine abductions or underworld journeys, but of the mundane yet vital routines of agriculture and the Eleusinian mysteries, ceremonies that ensured the land's fertility and bound people together. As you carry a basket of grain to the sanctuary, let us explore how these practices sustained ancient life and inspired enduring myths. What hidden labors shaped these rituals, and how did they anchor a society dependent on the harvest? In the Bronze Age, Eleusis was a fertile plain, ideal for growing wheat and barley, staples of the Mycenaean diet. Your days begin at dawn, guiding a wooden plow pulled by oxen through loamy soil, your hands calloused from gripping the handles. Farmers like you plant seeds in autumn, praying for spring rains to swell the stalks. Harvests gathered in early summer are backbreaking sickles made of flint or bronze sliced through stalks, while women and children bundle sheaves, their chatter mingling with the rustle of grain. Granaries, built of mud brick, store the yield in clay jars, sealed to keep out mice. Linear tablets from nearby Pylos record these efforts, 200 measures of barley to Eleusis, ensuring food for festivals or trade with Crete, the Eleusinian. Mysteries, rooted in this agricultural cycle, were not mystical spectacles but communal rites tied to survival. The sanctuary at Eleusis, a simple stone structure in this era, hosted rituals honoring Demeter, goddess of grain, and her daughter, Persephone. You join processions carrying sheaves or clay figurines, offerings to ensure fertile fields. Priests and priestesses, chosen from local families, lead chants, burning sage and pouring libations of water and honey. These ceremonies, held twice yearly, align with planting and harvest, autumn rites for sowing, spring for reaping. Women play central roles, grinding barley into flour for sacred cakes, baked in communal ovens and shared under olive trees to strengthen community bonds. Daily tasks underpin these rituals. You thresh grain on stone floors, separating kernels with flails, while others weave baskets for offerings or mend ritual garments with bone needles. The sanctuary's upkeep is constant. Laborers sweep courtyards, repair altars with limestone, and dig channels to divert rainwater. Archaeological finds, like pottery sherds with grain motifs, suggest these rites were practical, not esoteric, linking divine favor to crop yields. The myth of Persephone's descent, later codified in the Homeric hymn to Demeter c. 7th century BCE, likely grew from these cycles, her time in the underworld mirroring the barren winter, her return the sprouting spring. Yet challenges loomed. Droughts, common in the Aegean, withered fields, forcing you to dig wells or ration grain. Earthquakes damaged granaries, requiring repairs with scarce timber. Linear B records hint at strained supplies, with 50 measures allocated to rituals. Instead of 100, these pressures shaped the mysteries, making them a plea for stability in an uncertain world. As you kneel at the altar, offering a handful of barley, one question persists: how did these daily labors and rituals sustain Eleusis through hardship? And what deeper needs drove their transformation into a mythic legacy as you tread the worn paths of Eleusis around 1350 BCE? The fields ripple with barley under a late summer sun, and the sanctuary hums with preparations for the autumn rites. You are a farmer, priestess, or laborer, your days woven into the fabric of planting, harvesting, and honoring Demeter and Persephone. The Eleusinian mysteries, far from esoteric spectacles, are practical rituals tied to the land's cycles, ensuring survival through community and routine. In this section, we delve deeper into the daily tasks that sustained these ceremonies, and the agricultural backbone of Eleusis, revealing the resilience of a people bound to the soil. As you carry a clay jug of water for the altar, a question lingers: how did these routines adapt to growing challenges? And what deeper human needs fueled the enduring power of the mysteries? Your life revolves around the harvest. In spring, you sow barley seeds, guiding oxen through furrows, while women scatter offerings of dried figs to invoke Demeter's favor. By summer, you reap with bronze sickles, stacking sheaves in ox carts for threshing on stone floors. The grain, winnowed with wooden forks, fills mud-brick granaries, where scribes in Lineae note 150 measures for the sanctuary on clay tablets. These records, found at Pylos, reflect a meticulous economy grain allocated for bread, trade, or rituals. Women grind barley into flour, their hands dusted white, while others bake sacred cakes in clay ovens, their smoke mingling with the scent of olive groves. These cakes, shaped like sheaves, are carried in processions, shared among families to affirm communal ties. The mysteries themselves are a rhythm of labor and devotion. The sanctuary, a modest complex of stone and timber, requires constant care. You sweep courtyards, repair altars cracked by earthquakes, and haul limestone to reinforce walls. Priestesses, often women from prominent families, prepare offerings, pouring honey and water into clay rhytons, burning sage in braziers. Men and women alike with baskets or linen robes for initiates, using looms weighted with clay. The rites, held in autumn and spring, mirror the agricultural year. Sowing seeds invokes Persephone's descent, while her return in spring celebrates sprouting crops. Archaeological finds, like terracotta figurines of Demeter, suggest these ceremonies were practical, tying divine favor to fertile fields, not mystical revelations. Challenges test this system. Droughts frequent in Aegean, parch fields, forcing you to dig irrigation ditches with wooden spades. Lineae tablets show reduced offerings, 30 measures instead of 100, reflecting lean years. Earthquakes, common in Greece, toppled granary walls, and laborers like you rebuild with scarce. Cedar, pests like locusts devour crops, prompting communal prayers and extra offerings of oil. These struggles shape the mysteries, making them a plea for stability. Women, central to the rites, lead chants, their voices echoing across fields, while men carry torches in nighttime processions, a practical signal to distant farms. These rituals, rooted in survival, foster unity as families share meals of barley porridge under starlit skies. The myth of Persephone, later recorded in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, grows from these realities, a descent reflecting winter's barrenness. Her returned the hope of spring. But the real story lies in the toil, the farmer ploughing through drought, the priestess mixing flour, the laborer patching walls. As you pour water at the altar, its coolness a brief respite. You wonder, how did these rituals, born of daily survival, evolve into a spiritual legacy? And what pressures pushed Eleusis toward transformation in a changing world? The oracle's whispers, priestly duties, and political consultations at Delphi. Imagine yourself standing at the foot of Mount Parnassus, where the ancient sanctuary of Delphi nestles, into the rugged slopes like a quiet sentinel overlooking the Gulf. Of Corinth, it's the 5th century BCE, and the air carries the faint scent of olive groves and wild herbs. Mingling with the smoke from distant altars, Delphi, known to the Greeks as the navel of the world, is not just a place of grand temples and marble columns, it's a living hub of divine communication, where the god Apollo speaks through mortal intermediaries. You, as a humble pilgrim or perhaps a curious traveler from Athens, approach the sacred precinct with a sense of quiet anticipation, your sandals crunching on the well-worn path that countless feet have trodden before. The heart of this sanctuary is the Temple of Apollo, a structure rebuilt multiple times after earthquakes and fires, each iteration more resilient than the last. Here, the priestly duties unfold in a rhythm as predictable as the rising sun. The priests, chosen from respected local families, begin their day at dawn with purification rituals. They bathe in the Costolian spring, its cool waters believed to cleanse both body and soul, preparing them for the sacred tasks ahead. You watch as they don simple white robes, symbols of purity, and gather in the temple's outer chambers to oversee the morning sacrifices. These are not dramatic spectacles but methodical offerings. A goat or sheep, selected for its unblemished coat, is led to the altar. The priests inspect the animal carefully, ensuring it meets the gods' standards: no spots, no limps, just quiet perfection. With a steady hand, they perform the ritual slaughter, the blood collected in bowls to be sprinkled on the altar stones, while the meat is portioned, some burned as an offering to Apollo, some shared among the priests and sanctuary staff in a communal meal that reinforces their bonds. As the day progresses, the priests manage the influx of visitors. Delphi attracts not only the devout, but also those seeking guidance on mundane matters: farmers worried about crops, merchants planning voyages. The priests act as gatekeepers, collecting fees and offerings that sustain the sanctuary. These contributions range from simple coins to elaborate statues, all tallied in ledgers with meticulous care. You might overhear them discussing the oracle's schedule. Consultations occur only on specific days, the 7th of each month, aligning with Apollo's sacred number. In between, the priests maintain the temple's archives, recording prophecies on wax tablets or stone inscriptions, preserving the god's words for posterity. Central to these duties is the Pythia, the oracle herself, a woman over 50, chosen for her purity and local roots, living a life of seclusion in a modest house nearby. She isn't a figure of mystery in daily life. She eats simple meals of barley bread and figs, tends to her own small garden, and prepares for her role through fasting and ritual baths. When the time comes, she enters the adyton, the inner chamber, seating herself on a tripod over a chasm from which vapors rise, inducing her trance. The priests flank her, ready to interpret her utterances, which emerge as fragmented verses, often ambiguous and requiring their scholarly insight to decode. But beyond these routine tasks lies a deeper layer of influence. The priests aren't isolated. Holy men, they correspond with scholars across Greece, staying informed on current events. This knowledge subtly shapes their interpretations, blending divine will with worldly wisdom. As you linger in the sanctuary's shade, listening to the priests chant hymns to Apollo, you can't help but wonder, what happens when kings and generals arrive, their fates hanging on these whispered words? How do the priests navigate the pressures of power while upholding their sacred vows? Continuing from the serene routines of Delphi's priests, you find yourself drawn deeper into the sanctuary's role as a crossroads of fate and politics. The morning sacrifices have concluded, and the air hums with the low murmur of consultations. Pilgrims queue patiently, their questions etched on lead tablets, some seeking advice on marriage, others on inheritance disputes. But it's the arrival of envoys from distant city-states that elevates the priest's duties from the ordinary to the orchestration of history. These visitors come not for personal solace, but for divine endorsement on matters that could reshape alliances and borders. Picture a delegation from Athens in the wake of the Persian invasions. Around 480 BCE, they approached the temple with gifts of gold and incense. Their leader, a stern archon, bowing before the priests. The consultation process is deliberate and layered. First, the envoys undergo purification, washing at the spring and offering preliminary sacrifices to appease Apollo. The priests, ever vigilant, review the query in advance, ensuring it's phrased respectfully. Then, on the appointed day, the Pythia sends a tripod. You can almost feel the tension in the adyton as the vapors rise, her voice shifting into ecstatic murmurs. The priests, trained in poetry and rhetoric, capture her words, often riddling and open to nuance. For the Athenians, the oracle speaks of wooden walls as salvation, a phrase the priests interpret as relying on their navy, guiding the mysticals to victory at Salamis. This interpretive role grants the priests immense subtle power. They aren't mere transcribers, they draw from a vast network of informants, travelers, merchants, even spies who keep them abreast of political currents. Delphi's location, central yet neutral, fosters this intelligence gathering. Priests correspond via couriers, exchanging letters sealed with wax impressions of Apollo's lyre. In quieter moments, they debate interpretations in the temple's library, surrounded by scrolls of past oracles, ensuring consistency with tradition. Yet, this influence demands balance. Accusations of bias could tarnish the sanctuary's reputation. During the Peloponnesian War, for instance, Sparta consulted Delphi, Before invading Attica, receiving approval that bolstered their resolve, the priests, aware of rivalries, craft responses that maintain ambiguity, allowing multiple outcomes while preserving divine impartiality. Daily life for the priests intertwines with these high-stakes encounters. Between consultations, they oversee the sanctuary's economy, managing olive orchards that produce oil for lamps and trade, or supervising slaves who maintain the pathways. Meals are communal, featuring lentils, cheese, and wine diluted with water. Discussions often turning to recent prophecies. The Pythia, recovering from her trances, rests under their care, her health monitored with herbal remedies. Resilience shines in their routines. Earthquakes frequently shake the site, yet the priests rebuild, viewing destruction as Apollo's test. As envoys depart with sealed scrolls of prophecy, you sense the weight of these whispers rippling outward. Colonies are founded on oracular advice, like Byzantium's establishment, or wars averted through cryptic warnings. But amid this, questions linger. How do these priests reconcile personal convictions with the god's voice? And what if a prophecy leads to downfall rather than triumph, challenging the very foundation of their sacred trust? As the sun dips behind Parnassus, casting long shadows over Delphi's stones, the priests wrap up their day's labors, the echo of the last hymn fading into twilight. You've witnessed the intricate dance of duty and divination, but now the narrative turns to the climaxes shaped by these oracular whispers and their enduring legacies. Political consultations at Delphi often culminated in decisions that altered the Greek world. Yet the resolutions were as measured as the priest's steps, methodical, reflective, and laced with human frailty. Take the case of Croesus, king of Lydia in the 6th century BCE, seeking assurance before warring with Persia. He tested the oracle with riddles, only to receive accurate responses that confirmed Delphi's veracity. Emboldened, he consulted on his campaign, interpreting the prophecy: if you cross the river, a great empire will fall as victory. The priests, delivering the words without elaboration, watched as Croesus marched to defeat, his own empire crumbling. This outcome underscored the oracle's ambiguity. Teaching resilience through misinterpretation, the priests, in aftermath discussions, archived the event as a cautionary tale, reinforcing their role as neutral conduits rather than advisors. In grander scopes, Delphi's influence peaked during the Archaic and Classical periods, advising on the founding of over 60 colonies across the Mediterranean. Envoys from potential settlers arrived with maps etched on clay, seeking Apollo's blessing. The priests, consulting the Pythia, provided sites and rituals, ensuring cultural continuity. These resolutions fostered Greek expansion from Sicily to the Black Sea, where new sanctuaries mirrored Delphi's, perpetuating the cycle of worship. Yet challenges arose. During Philip II of Macedone's rise, the oracle's declaration of him as invincible fueled conquests, leading to the Battle of Charonia in 338 BCE. Where Greek independence waned, the priests navigated backlash by emphasizing divine inevitability, their resilience evident in maintaining operations amid shifting powers. The Pythia's final prophecies waned by the Roman era, with Emperor Nero plundering the site and Theodosius, closing it in 391 CE amid Christian ascendance. But the priest's legacy endured in the lessons of tempered ambition, daily duties, those boring tallies of offerings, repairs to quake-damaged walls, sustained a system that blended spirituality with statecraft, highlighting human survival through adaptation. Reflecting on Delphi today, you might see parallels. In modern consultations, think tanks advising leaders, data oracles predicting outcomes. The whispers taught that wisdom lies not in certainty but in interpretation, urging us to approach power with humility. In an age of instant answers, Delphi reminds us of the value in deliberate, unresolved pondering, where the mundane details of life shape profound destinies. Mount Olympus slopes, shepherds, sanctuaries, and the daily worship of the gods. Envision yourself ascending the lower slopes of Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, where mist clings to pine forests and the distant roar of rivers echoes through valleys. It's the 8th century BCE, and this mountain, revered as the abode of the gods, isn't a realm of thunderous dramas, but a landscape of quiet endurance. The gods Zeus, Hera, and their Olympian kin are believed to dwell above the clouds in ethereal halls, yet their presence infuses the daily lives of those below. You, as a local shepherd or villager from the Thessalian plains, tread these paths not in quest of divine encounters, but in pursuit of livelihood. Your staff in hand, flock trailing behind, the slopes are dotted with shepherds' huts, simple stone, structures roofed with thatch where families eke out existence herding goats and sheep. Mornings begin with the milking ritual. You rise at first light, the air crisp and scented with wild thyme, to gather the animals from their night enclosures. The milk is churned into cheese in wooden vats, a process requiring patient stirring. Over low fires fueled by olive branches, these tasks are monotonous yet vital. A shepherd's resilience shows in mending fences against wolves or navigating rocky terrain during seasonal migrations to higher pastures in summer, lower in winter. Meals are sparse barley porridge flavored with herbs, perhaps a bit of honey from wild hives eaten communally under the open sky. Stories of ancestral hardships shared to pass the time. Interwoven with this routine are the sanctuaries, modest altars and groves dedicated to the gods. At the foothills lies Dian, a key site honoring Zeus, with its open-air altars surrounded by oaks. Here, shepherds pause for daily worship, not grand ceremonies but personal offerings, a libation of milk poured onto the earth, a prayer whispered for fertile lands. You might carve a small wooden idol of Hermes, protector of flocks, placing it in a niche by your hut. Worship is embedded in the ordinary before shearing sheep. Invocation to Demeter ensures bountiful wool, while evenings end with hymns sung. Softly to Apollo, the lyre's strings plucked by firelight. These practices foster a sense of connection to the divine, blending survival with spirituality. Shepherds, often isolated, rely on communal festivals like the Olympia Games every few years, traveling down to honor Zeus with races and sacrifices. But daily life demands practicality tracking, whether by Olympus moods, clouds gathering, like Zeus's brow, signaling storms that test human fortitude. As you rest against a boulder, gazing upward where myths say gods convene. A question stirs. How do these humble acts of worship intersect with the grander sanctuaries, where priests and pilgrims converge to honor the immortals? Building on the shepherd's steadfast routines along Olympus' flanks, you delve into the sanctuaries that bridge mortal toil and divine reverence, the mountain's lower reaches fertile with streams from melting snows, host clusters of sacred sites where worship transitions from solitary prayers to communal observances. Dian, nestled at the base, serves as a focal point, a sprawling sanctuary dedicated to Zeus. Its altars hewn from local stone, surrounded by groves where birdsong mingles with incantations. Daily life here revolves around the priest's understated duties. Unlike the oracles of Delphi, these caretakers are local men, often from shepherding families, selected for their piety rather than lineage. Mornings start with sweeping the sanctuary grounds, removing fallen leaves to maintain purity. You observe them tending to eternal flames on altars, feeding them with olive wood, symbolizing Zeus's unyielding power. Sacrifices are routine. A shepherd brings a lamb, its throat cut swiftly, blood offered to the god while the meat is roasted for a shared feast. These acts reinforce community bonds, with villagers gathering to discuss harvests or disputes, the sanctuary acting as a neutral ground. Worship extends beyond Dian to smaller shrines dotting the slopes, groves for Artemis, huntress of the wilds, where shepherds leave arrowheads as tokens for safe passages. Daily rituals include libations at dawn and dusk, water mixed with wine poured from clay ewers, accompanied by prayers for protection against landslides or beasts. Resilience appears in rebuilding after avalanches. Priests organize work parties, mixing mud bricks by hand, viewing repairs as devotion. Shepherds integrate this into their migrations, pausing at high-altitude altars to offer cheese curds to Pan, god of flocks. Evenings bring storytelling around campfires, myths of gods' exploits recited to educate the young, blending entertainment with moral lessons on endurance. Yet, as festivals approach like the Pyria Games honoring the muses on nearby slope stanchions, build, pilgrims arrive, straining resources, prompting questions. How do these influxes challenge the shepherd's isolation? And what unexpected outcomes arise from blending daily worship with larger divine consultations? As twilight envelops Olympus' contours, the sanctuary's lamps flicker like stars fallen to earth, marking the culmination of daily devotions. You've traced the shepherd's paths and priestly vigils, but now the narrative resolves in the quiet climaxes of worship and their lasting imprints. Festivals at Dian, held annually, bring resolution to the year's labors. Processions wind through the groves, shepherds leading oxen adorned with garlands, culminating in mass sacrifices where smoke rises heavenward, invoking Zeus's favor for bountiful rains. These events highlight human resilience in 480 BCE amid Persian threats. Locals consulted oracles at the sanctuary, receiving signs to fortify villages, fostering unity that aided Greek resistance. Priests interpreting omens from bird flights over the peaks, guided decisions on planting or herding roots, their advice rooted in observed patterns rather than spectacle. Daily worship's outcomes often surprised. A shepherd's consistent offerings might coincide with a mild winter attributed to divine grace, encouraging communal sharing during famines. Sanctuaries evolved, with Hellenistic expansions adding theaters for hymns, blending worship with culture. Roman influence later integrated emperor cults, yet core rituals persisted. Shepherds adapting without losing essence. The decline came with Christianity's rise. Sanctuaries abandoned by the 4th century CE, stones repurposed for churches. Yet, the legacy endures in folklore where Olympus slopes inspire tales of endurance. Reflecting now, you see how these mundane acts mirror modern routines, community gatherings. Nature's reverence teaching that survival stems from persistent, unassuming faith. In a fast-paced world, Olympus whispers of finding divinity in the everyday, urging reflection on our own overlooked rituals that shape collective resilience.